Once again, Michael, thanks for doing this event with us. It was a pleasure doing the first one with you. A lot of good information came out of the first event that we hosted back in December, and we're pleased to have you join us again. Unfortunately, we're not able to live web stream this tonight due to a few different issues that we're dealing with here, but we're sure to post this up for all of your viewers within the next week after we edit it up a little bit. So we hope to go over a lot of the questions that were posed to you on Facebook. There's a lot of keen and interested and aware people out there that do deal with your work on a daily basis, and I've learned a lot from your writings and your talks. A lot of them are joined here with us tonight, and a lot of them are going to be watching online. So we hope to cover as much ground as we can tonight, and once again we thank you for joining us. I'm going to hand it over to Dave.
Yeah, thanks again, Michael, for doing this event, and I also want to thank all the people that are going to be watching this in the future for for showing your support and having this interest in these topics. And so, Michael, we just again, thanks a lot for doing this, and we're going to get into some questions for you here. If that's okay with you?
That's great, and I have a few questions that Michelle has sent me. Very good ones, as a matter of fact. Let me just can I just give a couple of overview points first?
Sure, that'd be great.
I think this is more directed towards people who are new to my work, because I notice again, as we scan all the questions. First thing I'd like to say is that I don't give personal advice. So, when people are asking questions that is in tone towards me giving them personal advice, and I know one person was asking about, paths and spiritual techniques, and that kind of question amounts to giving that personal advice. So I don't do that in any shape or form. Secondly, I don't really comment on the work of other teachers. It's a good question about, what do I think of X, Y, and Z, Swerdlov or Jordan, or I don't know. And all through my career, I've never done that. It's just not my forte. I always insist that it's up to the people that are into our work to go ahead and compare and contrast. All right, so it's really up to the hunters to do that, as opposed to me being bugged by 1,000 questions about what I think of this guy and that guy. That's really irrelevant. People need to go in there and look at this stuff as they do anything. You compare and contrast and use their own intelligence there. So, to say, first thing, I don't give advice on personal level. Two, I don't comment on the work of other teachers in this field, although I certainly comment on the teachings of the wonderful people I referenced in other fields. And also, I don't endorse any spiritual paths or techniques. There's a couple of questions more from Eastern Oriental type people who want me to say what I think of this Swami and this Baba and this kind of aspect, and I have no comment on any of that at all. So there's a couple of other things I don't really like commenting on, like extreme abstractia, metaphysical abstractia about what I think happens after death, or whether I believe in reincarnation. But that's slightly less important. These three ones are very important. It's just, again, I think people who are familiar with me know that I don't deal with those, but the newcomers, they don't know that. And then on the two final points that will help us speed this whole thing up is that the psychic vampirism questions are great, but I want to hold off on those because within a few days, the audio of my psychic vampirism DVD is actually going to be posted either on Enslave, on the forum, and probably one other place. So, but anyway, it'll be on the Psychic Vampirism website itself. So in a couple of days, when people go to psychicvampirism.com, you'll actually won't be able to see the full DVD, but you will hear the entire audio. So this was a fantastic, very lengthy expose of psychic vampirism. So guys, all the people who asked me wonderful questions about that can, by all means, and it's free. So again, this is a free DVD audio, and later on in the year, the actual film aspect of it, the DVD itself, will be released. But right now, we've got the audio and pristine edition, and we want to make that available. Okay, and then maybe one last point on the female Illuminati. Again, no point really going into that because I'm still researching that and working on it, and I really want to find some amazing stuff. So I'd like to deal with that more down the line. Get more deeply into that. A couple of people asked about the Egyptian connection. Is there one to the female Illuminati? So far, I can say you better believe it. Absolutely there is, and I'll be going into that deeply. In fact, that's some of the most profound stuff I've actually discovered. And so, yes, there is an Egyptian connection. There's a monumental story there. But again, when it comes to psychic vampirism, just hold off for a week or less because we'll have the audio. And when it comes to female Illuminati, let's hold off on questions about that because it's just an ongoing thing. And let's not ruin it. Wait till the final product is out, and then we'll hit questions on that from now to doomsday. Okay. All right. So thanks for that. Thanks for letting me go a little bit of an overview.
Oh, not a problem at all, Michael, and that sounds great. Basically, as I agree, we do have a lot of new people that are coming in all the time. It seems like there's a great awakening that seems to be taking place, but it's on many different levels, and everybody's at different parts of the journey here. And so the question that Chris and I had formulated before this talk to sort of just get the ball rolling on maybe some current events and things and whatnot is that we basically just wanted to know, in your work in the past, you've spoken about the age of revealing. And, we definitely feel that we're in that time right now, and talks like this are part of that process. And so the question was basically, what do you feel the status of the age of, or what is the status of this age of revealing? And what's the status of the elite in this process? We've seen a lot of exposure coming out. We've had this recent stepping down of the Pope, and all kinds of stuff, exposures going on with the church, with the ritualistic child abuse and satanic, influences and whatnot. We've had things like this One People's Trust that's been set up as sort of like a countermeasure to try to expose on at least the surface level what's been going on. And then we've got all this in-your-face tyranny happening as a result. So we've got, all these blatant disregard for human beings and freedoms and rights and whatnot. We've had all these recent shootings. So it seems to be a very chaotic time, but it seems to be a little bit from both sides. So we just kind of wanted to start off with your take on where you think we stand. Where do the elites stand, and where do we stand?
Well, in the Architects of Control, and even before that, we kept on emphasizing that the age of revealing is an age. It's a mini cycle. So it's not about dates. And I think that, as you all know, we kind of get sidetracked a little bit by the 2012 theory. And then there's the legitimate 2012 theory, which is very interesting, very fascinating. And then there's the 2012 fiasco or circus that everybody got on about waiting for some, Stargate, some sci-fi, thing to happen. And this, again, is a delusional, Anyone had to look only at the astrological conjunctions. We did that the first Conspiratorium, we looked a bit at that. To know that this is obviously an ongoing thing. People never transform overnight. Then to tie it into your question, tyranny obviously doesn't end overnight either. What ludicrous infantilism to imagine that they're just going to roll up their carpets, and run away because of, 2012. This thing has been going on since the dawn of time, and therefore it's not just going to fizzle away. We are gaining ground on these people. There's no doubt about it. We're getting smarter all the time, but we still got a long way to go. And their plan is, continues. They have a chronology, and they're not finished with it yet. So I would say that now that 2012 is over, and the circus side of it, this new agey take on it, is obviously null and void. I think that's good, because now people can lock in more to, the theory that I proposed, which is that let's observe the cycle aspect of it. Let's stop thinking of it as a single point in time, and let's start by grasping this concept that it's more of a cycle of awakening. In some of the astrological conjunctions we spoke about last time, particularly this one with Uranus and Aries, you mentioned that there's a little bit of an astrological misnomer when it comes to the role of Aquarius or the role of Uranus. It doesn't rule all of the public. It actually rules the awakened members of the public, like the group that's sitting right here. So in astrological terms, a lot of people are interpreting worldwide awakening, mass movements, that kind of thing. When any competent astrologer knows that, no, it's not quite like that. Aquarius energy is actually quite specific. Aquarian energy is the Nikola Teslas, the Walter Russells, the Wilhelm Reichs, the people who have been spending time like you have, deeply looking into these matters. It's that group, that little demographic, that's going to initiate that change or come to an awakening. So my work, again, has never spoken about all of mankind waking up or anything like that. It never will happen like that. So I think that now there's going to be more of a chastened energy. I see that already. And I hope, obviously, that the most important thing of the age of revealing is that it is a continual deepening of our insights. Somebody asked a question on the Facebook about what can we do to, deal with the Illuminati. How can we cut them off at the pass? You do that by, one, continuing the process of study about their nature and their ways, and you, maybe Aquarius isn't quite the deepening, but the Pluto is. You see, there's other archetypes working for us that have Neptune. There's some astrological stuff there that's helping us do that. And the second thing you need to do, which I personally, this is very personal, so again, everyone doesn't need to actually buy into this, but my feeling or my worry is that the discernment about false teachers needs to be sharpened a little bit right now. I'm seeing a lot of bandwagon hoppers and a lot of wannabes. I'm not going to mention any names, but these, there's a certain amount of this taking place now, which wasn't quite there in the early days of this conspiratorial alternative research movement, right? When you had giants like T. Edward Griffin, and Eustace Mullins, and incredible men of great integrity. And right now it seems to be a lot of sprats running around, just basically taking labels and throwing out a lot of stuff that they never came up with themselves, pretending that they have. There's both males and females who are doing this in this movement. So I'm a little concerned about that we're going to get sidetracked, by these people who are just reiterating and label reading and pretending to be, very knowledgeable about the subjects, when in fact they really only have a surface knowledge of stuff. So, and in fact, this conspiratorium has been commissioned exactly because of that reason, that I believe the audience knows as much now as any of the teachers in this field. That was the whole premise of this, and I really believe that. So one of the side issues of this, one of the branches of that, is that we, people into this movement, beginners and seasoned people, need to be a little bit more discerning. Keep the discernment up, because you have a lot of jack-in-boxes jumping up in this field right now, pretending that they know a lot of stuff, and actually it's very superficial stuff. It's not particularly very deep. So continue the process of discovering who these monsters are on the higher level, and keep the discernment up so that when people jump up, to say, I got the facts, I got the truth. Be a little bit discerning. Some may have it, but others may not, and are looking, for a wrong reason to find a niche in this kind of movement. A great deal of discernment in this movement more than any other movement, because it's so synthetic. This is not computer science. It's not art, history. It's not other things. It's a very unique. I've always said that it's almost holy work. So there needs to be a lot of white blood cells pumping through us when we work in this field to keep away all the kind of the negative elements and wannabe elements, and chancers and chiselers and all sorts of people. And again, this is more my sort of tirade, but I think it's a value.
Yep. Michael, just to go on a little bit more about what you're talking about with cycles, whether or not they have to deal with astrological cycles, cosmic cycles. Do you think that this age of revealing, or this age of awakening, whatever label or term you want to put on it or anybody else puts on it, do you think we've been down this road before as a society? And if so, what prevented us from crossing that threshold and succeeding in what we're trying to do here, and that is ending tyranny, ending control, and ending in slavery? So do you think in the past we were at this pinnacle once before, whether or not be 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago? And where did those societies go wrong, or what did the controllers do in order to sequester that movement?
That's actually one of the best questions I've ever heard. Who came up with that one? Who came up with that?
I just did right now.
You need a massive pat on the back. I mean, that's just superb. And the only thing I think, I've never even really thought about that question actually, but two things do jump to mind right away. One is the whole story that you hear in the Mesoamerican tradition. You hear it in other traditions as well, about the ages, the 4 great ages. And that, the age of fire, the age of water, and all the rest of it. And each of these ages existed, and they came to a crisis and passed away. Madame Blavatsky has something like that as well when she talks about her Atlantean age and the previous ages, the Lemurian age. So there's many theories about these various ages. And of course that does imply then that civilizations of the past existed, rose to their peak, and then crumbled and fell. Although it's relegated to the realm of mythology, there's a lot of meaning in that, and I'm fascinated by that myself. I think it's very interesting, and if you go by the stories themselves, they absolutely swear blind. I mean, the authors of those stories are telling you bold-faced, even in the Irish legends, that absolutely Armageddons against good and evil were fought before in the past. Good won, but then there was some sort of also decline of the age of the gods, right? The age of the wise ones. This is one of many traditions. But it gives us the idea that then maybe there was a age of sorcery. You know, you find this in fiction, you find it in mythology, and it's only a matter of time, perhaps, before even the true facts about this come up. Then you have that concept of the yugas, in which you have the golden ages, you know, as opposed to the iron ages of ignorance. This is a very strong concept in Vedic teachings, and one has to give credence to these theories, always with reservations. When you're reading the Vedic studies, you've got to realize that a lot of that is nothing more than priesthood, and it's nothing to do with pre-Vedic, early Aryan teachings at all. So we have to bear that in mind, that the Puranas and some later books are basically priestly concoctions, so we've got to be extremely cautious of what's in there. That is one answer I would give to those people who keep asking me about, you know, Eastern mystical path. That, what I've just said, applies to that, which is be very cautious, because there is a pre-Aryan, or not a pre-Aryan, but a pre-Vedic era of the High Aryan and the High Arya, and that is quite different theologically and metaphysically than what came later, which is almost remained untouched until modern days in the Hinduism and all the stuff we know, right? Then the other thing that jumped to mind was Nietzsche's concept of the eternal return. And he actually believed, you know, some people think he meant it as a metaphor, and that's probably true. But he believed that everything we are doing right now, the conversation we're having right now, the clothes I'm wearing, you know, the place I'm in, everything, we all will do again, exactly as we've done it, and we'll do it again ad infinitum throughout the millennium. Now, we could never come to the bottom in this conversation of what he meant by that, because no philosopher in the whole of their career, or since Nietzsche lived, has ever been able to fathom what he meant or come to a full understanding of this. So it's just something to take on board. Nietzsche, like Schopenhauer, was very influenced by some Eastern mysticism, as a matter of fact. That's been coming out more and more recently, that everyone knows that Schopenhauer was, but Nietzsche himself seems to be quite turned on by some Eastern thinkers. And so he may have got this concept. Or he may have simply, the way I personally take it, is that it was a metaphor. And it was a metaphor that really makes sense when you think that until man steps out of ignorance and learns how to see things right, and learns to master himself, right, which is Nietzsche's other theory, the will to power, digging deep inside yourself for that strange will that can conquer your own shortcomings. His misinterpreters have totally misinterpreted this, of course. But until you've done that, until you're able to become the Superman within yourself, spiritually speaking, then almost he understood that everything you do has this mark of sameness, a mark of banality. You know, how many times, you know, how many coffees and teas have I had through the centuries? You know, how many times is my name being called by other people? How many times, in other words, what I'm saying is look at the repetition, just the simple observation of repetition in one blank, which would astonish us. Whether it's making the breakfast or, you know, giving the pets their food, or, you know, just the market incessant. I mean, Patrick McGowan would say, you know, you're driving to work and all that, but even the more, those are more, you know, obvious. But if you look at even in unobvious ways, but the complete repetition of the human existence, there's something in what Nietzsche is talking about. And until a radical metamorphosis takes place in your head, in your thinking, he's not talking about physical, then you are a victim of collective consciousness, collective, acculturated. And he was, you know, nauseous about this. He was so mentally sickened by this repetition and by this, and even in an intellectual circle, I think he was more addressing the realm of ideas of the people he hung with in universities and colleges, the so-called intellectual set, the so-called theological set. Look at the repetition that's in religion. Look at the Orthodox churches of Russia, of Greece. Look at the incredible Catholicism, right? You know, this unbelievable repetition, just a wheel of constant repetition of candles and beads and sin and, you know, age after age the same thing. So in some sense, even though it doesn't answer your question bang on, there is an enormous repetition in our lives. And so why not on a bigger metaphysical level? Why not? That we call the adversary into existence right? Either on the macro level of genetics that we're talking about, and perhaps even alien intervention, which I believe in, or even on a more domestic front, the adversarialness that we have to deal with on a daily basis, or even on a very internal basis. Aren't we calling that in? Aren't we doing something? Aren't we content with our own limited ideas of things that then call some sort of adversarial energy in? I believe that. And until we step out of it and crack it, until we finally grasp the sword of truth, then of course we're doomed to repeat. In one way, William Blake said, the fist that crushes the tyrant's head becomes a tyrant in its head. So you get rid of one pestilence, one evil, only to replace it with another. We've seen this done through the historical time. So this is a huge, huge thing. But nevertheless, the individual can change it. The individual can do a lot to stop this repetitive pattern in their own lives if they so choose. But it will mean working with the will to power, working with this incredible ability to overcome mental and emotional obstacles within oneself.
Well, yes, Michael, thank you for that answer. A lot of it, what you're telling us here now, it's I'm recalling a lot of spiritual readings that I've educated myself on. A lot of it has to deal with the good and the evil, the light and the dark. And it seems like what you're touching on is that what I was taught was that in order to appreciate the light or the good, one must embrace the darkness, realize what it is, and then let it go. And it's only because of the darkness that one could truly appreciate the light. So when you're mentioning now that we might actually bring these negative energies into our society and into our consciousness, it might be an actual aspect of the human body or the human mind to do that in order to learn and in order to move ahead as a spiritual being.
Well, you see, like I said, the psychic vampirism thing's on its way, so it's all in there. But one other important note is that when you deal with evil and its presence, you often find that it's always in the presence of very good people. So, in other words, to say it another way, when evil damages somebody, the damage is mostly done to the best of us. It's almost like a hallmark. And that means that it is virtue that attracts evil. It's almost like it's because of people's caring. It's because of people's lack of discernment. It's because of their projection of their own goodness on worthless creatures that we leave ourselves wide open, and so I've always created a message to people that I know who question me on these concepts, which is that in terms of evil, in terms of this sort of psychic attack or whatever you want to call it, it is always happening to those people whose discernment is low and whose caring for other people is up. So there's almost no remedy to it unless good people sharpen up and almost even become a little bit more hard, as a matter of fact. I know it's horrible to say, but then what are you going to do? Just have your head beaten off the walls of the universe constantly until you do wake up through life? Or can you work with that energy beforehand and be very aware that for every good deed, you pay for every good deed? And also to realize that, you're sitting target for these evil people, and be very conscious then of who you're helping. Don't just willy-nilly help anyone until they have to really look like they need help, number one. And even then be cautious. So there's a lot of small things that, sort of people need to still be aware of in this process. I'm always thinking it's the stone in the shoe. I'm a big believer that, that the problems of life are not that severe, that all of them can be solved quite easily, but it's just small, trivial things almost that have gone unseen, things that can easily be remedied. Somebody asked a question about inaction. I think it was Pat who asked the question about why are we so inactive? Why do people fear to act? Why do they fear to fight evil and get up and do something about what's going on? And I think that I'd like to address that for just a second, and that is that from the earliest years, the will to make a large statement and get out there and fight, political tyranny or whatever it might be, or to even stand up about these mega matters, is our back is broken by the parents from very early on. That's just the first thing. And then for the rest of life, we go around carrying either physical abuse or mental abuse, psychic abuse. And that preoccupies us so much that we almost then are inert when it comes to fighting other evils. And even though, of course, the world is full of people who are making a good effort. So I think that look at it this way: the cutting of the cord, the umbilical cord, has always been known by psychologists to represent a kind of a primal trauma, right? I mean, it's like a mini death. So even the act of being born is considered so traumatic and so stressful by a child's mind that the overcoming even of that, how are you then going to expect that person to get up and go and overcome themselves and fight evil and deal with trauma, and deal with separating from the herd, right, the consensus, when even the very first action of being born was infinitely traumatic? And now you expect them to leave the consensus? Another reason is that, another reason why there's a certain amount of fear of acting is because human beings carry an unconscious or subconscious identification with the system, with the state. Right? Or maybe it's born out of the stupidancy that we're talking about. But we have a subconscious allegiance to the state apparatus because it's a father figure. We saw this in communist countries, so I'm not wrong. In communist countries, people just signed on and regimented and wore those dopey gray uniforms, and so we even have it. And we have look at Catholicism again, look at religion. So we have a tremendous look at even the third world countries and how the religion has dominated their consciousness. So that there's plenty of proof that far from acting against tyranny, we have allegiance with it because we think there's a contract there. We think that if we sign on and show allegiance, we're going to get back the securities and the things that we need, and also the common bond, the feeling of commonality where we have with other people. Then psychologically, people don't like change. The political milieu today, all these politicians in America and what have you, they talk a lot about change, but they offer you the same old, same old, same old. More of the same is what you get. But the talk is of change, knowing full well that people don't like change. What they want is the familiar. Don't take the familiar away. So we have an agreement to let these people keep talking about real change and the new, but all we get is more and more of the same in almost every regard. In fact, that's why a lot of advertising, when it comes to these politics, is looking back to the frontier days of America. You see, there's a lot of retro focus as well, a lot of imagery from these old days, because again, it poses as something new, but it's really not. It's going backwards. It's regression. And in politics, that's why it's a useless thing, because you never will ever actually experience something new. So when I talked about, the overcoming of all our problems is an easy thing, it won't really happen within a political setting at all, or a democratic setting. It just will not happen. And that's why people like myself who have these remedies have to speak about it. Because to do so, you're overthrowing every conceivable, concept that people have been brainwashed with pretty much for the last several hundred years.
Okay, Michael. Because we're not recording this, we're going to edit this out. Is there? We're hearing you, but we're not hearing you clear. It's like we're getting your words. It's just coming through a little
echoey,
staticky. I was just wondering if you can, try that out.
Yeah, I can move the mic closer to me.
Maybe that's a good way to go. Yeah, move the mic a little bit closer to you.
Okay. Was it really bad? Or?
No, we can hear you fine. It's just, it's very tinny and it's a little echoey. So we're just trying to get the best sound quality we can.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I can sit closer to the mic. Maybe that'll be better. How's that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's much better.
Okay.
That's much better.
Okay.
Well, thank you for that, Michael. If you're ready to go forward, I do have a question here from the Conspiratorium page on Facebook. It's anonymous, but someone was asking, I'd love to know what Michael thinks about the dimensional aspects of energy and evil and how they interplay with our reality. And I guess that maybe is hitting a little bit about what you were talking about, but if you have any other things you want to clarify in that regard, we just want to know.
Well, it's a little abstract, but there was another question, I think, from on the Archons from, let me see where I wrote that down. Yeah, Stuart had asked a similar question about, and again, I think he's addressing the more of the sort of the disembodied entities that may be in contact with these Illuminati, and I agree that they do exist. I think that this has to be taken on board. But all I can really say about them is that, and Stuart was asking about why will they remain hidden? Will they and their actions stay hidden? And my answer is yes, they will, because like any master criminal individual or any criminal class, the last thing they want is exposure, right? I mean, we're not talking Hollywood here. We're talking about real, serious historical criminality on a immeasurable level. And they want to stay hidden, like all criminals do. And it's up to us, to shine the light on them. I mean, but this very principle of them desperately wanting cover is what kind of awakened me to even looking at the female Illuminati concept. It made it less crazy to me. Because, of course, we obviously don't know a lot about what's behind the veil, so anything is possible. And once I started to entertain this idea that what we do know can be a lot of chimera or can be quite distorted, actually, it opened up more of the idea that, maybe there's something even weirder. Where there's either, like for instance, as I said, in the context of the female Illuminati, could it be that a female group is either in total charge of dominion of the whole world conspiracy, or at least in co-conspiratorial, co-conspiracy? So, and that was born out of this very concept of realizing that don't just take on face value what we know. The secrets are so much deeper, so much more intricate, and so you have to open your mind to all possibilities. You cannot be narrow in this at all. And then, of course, the symbolism and everything else, which I'll be getting into in the DVD, confirmed it for me, right? But to answer the question about the Archons and their energy, what can one say? I mean, these people, just like Alice Bailey and others have clearly told us, work in a hypnotic way. I said before, you can either think of it as a possession in the way that Christians usually think of it, like a demonic possession. But that's kind of limited in some respects, because it makes you think of some sort of poltergeist, Spielberg, entering into somebody. But can we not see it the other way, in which these people have so negated their humanness? The average politician, the average, one of these, you asked about the Pope resigning. The Pope is nobody, so even though on the surface level, on TV land, it's amazing what a crisis that the Pope has resigned. He doesn't run thick. It's the College of Cardinals, right? So when I talk about emptying yourself out, these satanic sorcerers in the College of Cardinals that, they run the Pope. In a being like that, or in a politician, or in any other kind of warmonger, or these higher Illuminati people, is it a possession in the way that a Christian would think of it? Or is it more that these people have rescinded, sort of gutted themselves, and exorcised themselves of every human trait? Generationally, their families have allowed them to do this, and then they do it through whatever hazing rituals or other weird, bizarre things they're involved in. And then something has to come into them. So what are we dealing with here? And C.S. Lewis asked a lot of these questions. His work is trying to look at that concept in a different way. To us down here, it really doesn't matter, does it? If these people are possessed by evil or obsessed or whatever way they've done it, whatever way they're in league with these forces, it really doesn't ultimately matter. The fact is they're evil, they need to be dealt with, and the human race is more than capable of dealing with it, as long as it starts waking up to some of the machinations that they've been using, which is religion, which is politics. These are the methods by which they divide and rule us.
So with your work, it's you're taking a look at what we can all do individually to avoid being put in that position on any level whatsoever, because obviously these Illuminati characters, they actually go through these rituals like cremation of care ritual and whatnot to eliminate that any kind of higher consciousness or connection to the human race or to the planet. Whereas, but on the everyday level though, we also have people that choose to ignore their higher self and go into, the more ego-based, the more, I don't know what you want to call it, but they go into that. And do you think that that's maybe what the Gnostics were mentioning when they were talking about these Archons, in the sense that they said it was like a mind parasite, where they're really just turning your own faculties against you so that you enact this violence in the world? Is that where, we can even address this on the everyday level as well, correct?
Yeah, and remember, the more I want to get to this parasite thing as well in a second. It features in my Disciples of Mysterium work, but it also is turning up now in this movement quite a lot, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. But the moment that you the moment that you align yourself like a teenager, you know, aligning yourself with a pop singer or whatever, or a team. You know, to all intents and purposes, that football player, that golfer, you know, that movie star, or you know, like an Elvis type of guy. I mean, to your intent, to the fans' consciousness, he's fucking God. I mean, that's Sir Galahad right there, you know. And you project all your inner imaginative fantasy qualities, beautiful things, right? You project onto that being because you're identifying with them. And so for you, that person becomes monumentally important. The way they walk, the way they talk, what they wear, you know, their moral values. You study their biographies, you know, and all the rest of it. It's the same thing further up the ladder. These monkeys that operate in these hierarchical structures like these, you know, Freemasons and what have you, they're signing on to a particular solar view, right? And they worship the people that have been put in front of them, who have been predecessors of this, you know, tradition. So they're getting they're identifying. It's a form of identification, but the identification in their case goes way beyond, and then it's, I think it's called I can't remember the term now, but it's known as an emptying out of oneself. They think it's all the rage over in India. You think it's all very holy and all, right? But there's other versions of it. And it's the emptying out completely of oneself. And that can't happen until, you know, something comes in. You can call that God, or you can, and they have, believe me, they actually think it's God. They actually do believe that these Archons, or whatever they're being possessed by, you know, is a spiritually elevated thing. And that's why you see such an incredible allegiance to it. Ideologically and all sorts of ways that they sign on to this kind of stuff, you know. And they want to midwife us into it through their whole post-humanism little agenda. Behind that is an occult agenda and so on. But the simple act of identification. So when somebody like, you know, Stuart there was asking, what the hell do we do? What you do is you go out and do the same thing, but you have to identify with something earthy to combat their little, you know, their little Apollonian nightmare. That means, you know, how connected are you? How earthed are you? How grounded are you? We went into this in the last chapter of the Atlantis book. That your salvation is the world, is the earth, is nature. How connected are you to that place? You know, because that's your weapon, that's your strength. But if you're just sort of not connected, not bolstered, you really are weak in fighting these people. You have to do your own rituals. You have to connect with something. You have to have your totems. You have to have your weapons in place. And I think that that's a very, very key aspect. But remember, I can't tell that person what their totems are. I can't tell. This is where the trick is. Each person, in order to use this will to power, or like I said in posthumanism, get out to nature and do your thing. You see, nobody can sketch, nobody can create that map for you. Nobody, in fact, that's one of the biggest warnings of all. It's one of the biggest warnings of all. If you want to, somebody even asked a question, I think it was Jeffrey, about what define, Michael, can you define the higher self? Because you talk a lot about the lower self. How can one define the higher self? The higher self is the very thing that we've suppressed the most under all of that parental imagery, right? We live to their image of what they have for us, and then it becomes society. So the most suppressed thing in our life is our own sense of self. But here's the trick. You can never uncover the self unless you do it yourself. It's to and for the self. Nobody else's statement, nobody else's technique has the slightest bearing on a man or a woman discovering their true self. Right? When you take the instructions of other people, you know, it's useless. It immediately applies to the social self, by definition. So the process of discovering the self, which is the secret of defeating evil, because that's where it is, that's where the Aladdin's cave of all the super weapons are, to defeat any evil. Because the man who is centered, he laughs at evil. Right? The man who is so strong, like I said in the last chapter of the Atlantis book, who's so systemically, psychically, and emotionally strong, his enemy can't defeat him by any of their imbecility, their techniques, right? He has won. But you don't conquer the enemy. You don't destroy them. You can't do that because they're handing you the very weapons by which to fight them. So there's only this weird other Zen sort of, you know, martial arts technique. And the greatest literature tells you that. I didn't invent that. It's there. The messages for this, you know, for conquering the greatest evil are already written by our forefathers of how to do it. but you don't do it by open war and open conflict. Then they win, because they're actually handing you the techniques. They've actually created those techniques. It's a totally other kind of action. And unfortunately, the human race, we're very far away from understanding the principles of that kind of action. So we do what we can to awaken people to it. And hopefully, they'll sign on for it later on.
Okay, that leads into a question from Facebook, from Sam. What is the true function of the ego in one's journey of self-creation? What is the internal adversary? Is it my ego, the superego, or the self-sadistic, self-hating tendencies?
Okay, there's again top of the line questions there. Who was that? Who asked that?
That was asked by Sam.
Yeah, this is huge. You'll find his answers, by the way, in my Disciples of Mysterium book and my work on that and the post-humanism. It's all there. But again, to answer it in this context, the ego is basically the part of us that's aware of the external world. Like the unconscious is not aware on that level. That's why we call it the unconscious. And remember, it's not about sections of the brain, it's more about a way of seeing. So the inherited way of seeing that we call the unconscious, which is the millions of years of I hate to use the word programming because it's so mechanical sounding, but that's what it basically is. It's nature's programming, organic programming. Then out of that came the ego, which is aware of daily life, right, what we call individual life. And then out of that grew a special part of the ego that used to be called the ego ideal, or superego. And actually, ego ideal is a better word for it. It's used less, but it's actually a good word because it contains the appropriate word, ideal. It's the ideals that the ego creates in order to move towards to have a tomorrow, to have a future. Right? We're future-oriented beings, and it's the superego that is much more conscious about the future than the ego. So ego ideal or superego is so important to know about. Now, the first ideals are of the parents. Of course, they're usually rotten ideals, but the kid doesn't know that, right? I mean, you have to choose mommy and daddy as your first ideals, and God help you. But there you are. You're stuck with that, right? And you have uncles and aunts, and then finally, later on, other people external to your life. But to answer Sam's question is that, yes, I think I do subscribe to the post-Freudian concept that the superego is our problem. And I hammered this as much as time allowed in post-humanism. So if he goes back and listens to it, he'll hear me mention Anna Freud's and the people who worried about the superego. But to break it down, to unpack it, is this. Again, it's worth saying. The superego is nothing more than the conditioning of the parents and the conditioning of the world, right? That impinges upon our sense of selfhood. So the superego is certainly that part of us that is suppressive and oppressive and is responsible for the suppression of the true self that we talked about, that I refer to as the imperial self. If you didn't have the superego, we'd be a lot better off. But you need the superego because all of these parts of consciousness have a meaning, right? They have a purpose. But what has happened is the superego is merely the instrument of the world, of our societies, of our collective, all the voices. This is where it goes wrong, because as society itself becomes more and more pathological, more and more crazy and insane or shallow as it's becoming, then unfortunately the consciousness of the newborn kids is embodied, as you can see all around you, taking place now. So when they say that the parent is responsible, our forefathers are responsible for the state of decay in the world, you're absolutely right, they are, by way of this superego. Now, the way out of it is simple. The ego has more power actually than the superego. The ego itself has more power. It can veto. It can change. You can change. So to all these monkeys' asses who are talking to you about the ego's got to go, I don't know where they ever found this, and I don't care, and I think it's rotten. And you had it in the 60s, and we still got it in the New Age movement, and it's got to go. The ego of anything is the part of you that you're going to rely on. It has many limitations, but so does every other part of consciousness. So you don't cut off your thumbs and say the hand doesn't work. The ego is the part that can veto, can finally get enough strength, ego strength, right? To say, no, I'm not going to live up to these ideals. I'm not going to do what the teachers in the society wants us to do. It's the superego is badgering. It's that voice, it's that punitive voice, prohibitive voice. It's nagging at us every time we do something wrong, and I always coax people to listen to its voice, to get familiar with it. That when you think you've done something wrong, or you pulled a little white lie, or you rip somebody off, or or you sort of didn't do right by a friend or whatever. You know, it's a constant nagging voice. Now we need it because it's part of morality. But is true, what Nietzsche and these people asked is true morality merely the voice of society and the morals and values that society is imposing on you, and your conformity to it is your measure of morality? Or is your morality self-born? Right? And I don't care how many priests exist, how many parents exist, you know, how many rules and regulations. Aleister Crowley sort of ties in a little bit with this, and many other teachers as well. But they were asking this fundamental question. Is your morality organic and coming from within inside yourself by your own set of understandings, your own will? And by the way, if you happen to be attuned to the universe, you will have that will. Or is your concept of morality merely what Big Brother and all its representatives are telling you that you conform to? Well, the answer is obvious. Our form of morality is paper thin, which is why it's being broke so many times, why criminality is rampant right now. It's because, yes, these people were right. The kind of pseudo-morality we have is conditioned by religion, conditioned by the society, isn't what the paper it's written on, and then is breached more and more as society passes, you know, as we go down through history. What needs to take place is a quantum shift where people are being taught, like I talked about children learning discernment, and then people have asked me 3-4 questions about how parents do this and how parents do that. Parents are the bloody problem. I thought I made that clear in post-humanism. The parent is the major problem in the raising of the child because the parent is already contaminated. His spirit, his inner child is already broken from his own parents. How the hell? I don't mean that it can't be done, but that parent has to do a monumental study of his own. And if you do not have a book by Alice Miller in your collection, or Wilhelm Reich, or Alexander Lowen, you ain't doing too good. In fact, where's your Ayn Rand? I can go through a checklist and say, hey parent, what are you reading? And by omission, if you do not have these people's works in your library, you ain't doing too good. What are you reading? Some New Age spinner rack shit? That's not going to help. You've got to go to the masters on this subject. This is huge. This is the real evil. You've brought in a child and exposed them to this crazy, fucked up world, and you think that it's going to do it all on its own? You have a monumental mental responsibility. You signed on for something that you're God in that person's life. But you know what parents are doing? They're turning around and making an instant slave robot the moment that the child appears out of the womb. He's immediately, you know, either a crutch or a slave. Forget anything to do with, you know, and I'm right, aren't I? I mean, look at history. We are in this state because of this constant, you know, neglect. All the literature is there. All the masters are there. All their work is there, telling you about the role of the human body, the role of psychology, the role of the child psychology, right? And we're not listening to it. And we're reaping the whirlwind because of that. So, you know, fighting the Illuminati, you know, is a big thing, the big guns on the hill. No. It starts very, very humbly. It starts very, very humbly inside the self, in the clarification and working with these ego forces to overcome some of the super-ego thing, which is nothing more than the representative of society. And as the society gets sicker and sicker, the mind becomes sicker and sicker. Until now, it's so pandemic that even the medical freaks, you know, they perpetrate the biggest fraud on earth just by wearing those white coats, but hell, even they have realized they can't deal with it. Now it's just plugging drugs into people. You couldn't even have an army of psychologists. You couldn't even battalions of psychologists. It's impossible. They realized that won't even work. You can't psychoanalyze everyone on earth. There's too many messed up people. So now it's just a matter of just bring out the barrels of bromide, you know, and pharmaceuticals and hope that that works. And what's going to turn everyone into is just complete and utter vegetables. And now they've even discovered that some of these drugs aren't working anymore. I foresee that one of the greatest problems in the future is simply disease. Some of the pathogenic, you know, diseases of bacteria and all the things that they find it in 50% of American meat now is all becoming immune. Even in England, it's coming a crisis where all the cows, the bacteria, these lethal bacteria in the cows and other livestock is becoming completely immune to all the penicillins and whatever else they're doing. And so now the person whose body, somebody asked about this, somebody whose body is not up, you know, their immunity is very strong even in a physical context, although that's very much linked still to attitudinal immunity, by the way. But unless that is, you know, taken on board, and questions of diet, and questions of meat eating, and all of these things are brought to the table now, well, we may be in a very, very, very sad state, because the moment that the body is weakened, then the mind is weakened, and then Big Brother wins again. So there's new genocides on their way. There was genocides after the First and Second World War with the Spanish flu, the introduction of beer, more of the fluoride into the water, which then affected the beer. So people who drank incessantly after the wars, the men became very docile and weak. I've gone into this stuff. But now there's going to be even more versions of this through all of these weird drugs. You know, and I've got a lot of information out on the forum so people can check it out, especially on the post-humanism page.
Thank you for that, Michael. We now have a question from a member of the audience here. So, Linnea, if you just want to introduce yourself and then go ahead and ask.
Hi, I'm Linnea. Unfortunately, it was really fuzzy at the beginning when you were kind of laying out the guidelines for what you do want to be asked and what you don't want to be asked. So I'm kind of just going to ask this, and you can answer whatever you feel is comfortable for you. I guess a long time ago, I kind of discovered the observable eye theory. So for a long time, research was very objective. Everything was looked at objectively, like they weren't part of the research that they were studying. But quantum physics is now saying, well, it's probably been saying this for a while, but now it's more obvious that quantum physics is saying that the observer actually has a lot to do with the outcome that they're getting, right? So it's almost entirely subjective. So if you're looking at, like, it's kind of like it makes the ground fall under my feet, right? Like then what's real and like what's not, and what's me bringing forth the information and what's real information, and you know, like does it matter what I'm thinking? I'm not sure.
Well, in fact, you see, the real answer to that is that everything you're thinking has the greatest meaning, because, like I said in the first chapter of Disciples of Mysterium, my philosophy is very subjectivist. We sometimes get caught in these terms. I think one of the biggest problems is even the terms subjective and objective. Because the more you study them, the more you realize that this language just simply doesn't cover what's really happening. In the latter parts of the books, I went deeply, deeply into that to show that there is really no such thing as a subject and object, by drawing on the philosophies of the great French philosopher Merleau-Ponty and others, who in a Western context really made us see that this is delusional, this Cartesian idea of subjects and objects. And of course, if you take that concept of that dichotomy to its extreme, then what it does is it makes us really separate from the world in which we live, which is a complete and utter joke. Nature and man are one. But the God Squad, right, these are the rationalists, they're talking about a world outside. And when you're up there with God, looking down, then you have the correct perspective. Of course, you got to die first. But once you're up there with their God, then everything will make sense. And people believe that for thousands of years and still do. Then you have the empiricists, like you say, the scientists, who for hundreds of years burned people at the stake and politically, I mean not politically, but professionally assassinated anyone who spoke against this idea that what you see is what you get. Right? Later with quantum science it all came back in, didn't it? But for hundreds of years the empiricists were saying, look, man is just another machine, another random thing in a world of just pure matter. Until they're shot in flames. Most of those, what we call positivist movements, crumbled under their own weight. It's too lengthy to go into all that story now, but these materialistic movements, even though people still subscribe to them, basically are toothless, right? They're completely bankrupt. But in a more sinister way, other clever writers have said that the reason why the materialist philosophers and scientists wanted to despiritualize nature is for the exactly same reason that you dehumanize a person. You can kill and control them then without any conscience. So if you dehumanize a man, you have complete power over him. And if you despiritualize the universe, it's just matter, it's just blocks, it's just random stuff, gray matter, well then you're in control. Now you say, well, and if I want to go in there and move things around and go on safaris and slaughter elephants and the whales and just go crazy with it, you know, create ecocide wherever I put my feet, who's going to stop you? Right? The world is just an accident, and therefore you can, stalk through it like the crazy people that we are and what we've done, and we still do it today. It's no better today than it was in the past. And this kind of thinking, so both the rationalist and the empiricist side. Now, in the middle there, you've got your little quantum guys, they're saying, watch out, it's a quantum universe, and how your own way of perceiving it is actually changing the reality. Mystics have been saying that for centuries. So I like the theory, but what my work is about is to try and make each individual not theorize these ideas, but really, really feel deeply connected to nature. Not just think about it mentally as a sort of a concept, but actually go out there, deal with nature, deal with your human body, and really feel it yourself, as opposed to thinking about it, or even talking about it. The book also features personalism, which is don't communicate your dreams to everyone. Don't go out there and talk about the deepest, reservoir of teaching that your imperial self is communicating to yourself. Haven't we prostituted enough without even the content, the deepest content? I mean, in Mercurial, there's lots and lots of stuff to talk about amongst mankind. We can all share a lot of content, but there's another place, is there not? Or maybe there isn't. Maybe people don't care about that holy space anymore, as Nietzsche said they don't. Maybe we are just going to prostitute it all. Then nothing can be done. But I hold out hope that no, people can understand there's a sacred space, mentally and emotionally, within myself, and I don't just blab it out and communicate it and write about it and all the rest of it, at least in words. I'm okay if it's communication in, say, music or in art. That's what art and music are for, the communication of deeply held understandings, but in a non-verbal and without using words, without using that kind. To express in those other ways through the imagination is perfectly allowable, and some of the greatest communication has in fact been done that way. That's why when you listen to Beethoven and Mozart and lots of other people I could mention, you're just, what is this? Well, what is this? Is that these people are communicating to you universes of information that they've understood it, the words can't do it, so they don't even bother. Now we're kind of losing that. The kids are being taught, losing that. And I'm not negating language. It's very important. But there's a certain other private place. And when we continually violate that, this is an answer that also applies to the questions we had earlier about ego, superego, and all the concepts of the mind, right? The structures of consciousness. But they very much go to the heart of what you're asking about. Our own perceptions, our own subjectivity. Well, there is no subjectivity. If we're prostituting it, how can we even laughingly call ourselves a self? What is private about us? So one of the greatest meditations of all is to actually sit down with oneself and say, what the hell is private about my life, if anything? Not just your weird fantasies and thoughts. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what is healthily, beautifully preserved. You go into a museum, they don't just leave the paintings in the Ming vases for everybody to smear. Everything precious, even a lawn. It says keep off the grass, all right? Everything precious. Beautiful jewelry, beautiful instruments. They're preserved, they're kept behind. Do we learn something from this? Yet the human being has been taught to value himself so little, right? This is the legacy of our parents who didn't value themselves. And so everything's on display. Everything about us is on display, like, what do they call it? Exhibitionism. The private space has become almost negligible, almost non-existent. And this accounts for our relative, our visions of beauty, our own personal enjoyments. Is there something, say it another way, is there something that we have done for each of ourselves, that we love it, listening to music, playing music, and we don't do it for other people? Is there a single thing in our lives that we do behind a closed door just for ourselves? And I think the answer is no. And one of the things is we need to bring that back. The collectivism is seeping into everything that we're doing in this world. And the more it creeps in, the less so-called subjectivity, quote unquote, right? In other words, the less selfhood we have. So right now, I'm observing all the things that erode true selfhood. And believe me, there's a lot of stuff. So there's a place for communication and there's a place for relationship. But you cannot have those at the cost of relationship with oneself. And the global village that these post-humanists are signing us in for is a world in which we have relationships with everything on this planet. Brotherhood of man! People you never met or don't even know who the fuck they are, and they're telling you, bond with it. What is this? Right? Everybody's in relationship with everyone, but there's no relationship with oneself. This is the real danger. This is the ultimate danger and the seed of evil. Is the loss of self in each individual, but you sign on for this globalistic, collectivized stuff. This is what has been happening. You have to turn it on. It's not on.
Go right ahead.
I was just gonna comment, and I really hope this doesn't offend you in any way, but So with the type of work that you're doing, do you think that you play any role in the results that you see?
I do. Turn the mic off. I do, but I have only seen that through the communications I get from other people. I'm colorblind to that. I have never set out to even do the work that I'm doing. It's a very bizarre set of sequences, steps that got me into doing this in a public way, I mean. And whether people like it or didn't like it has never personally affected me in the slightest. But having been a public person now, I get so much positive feedback, even today, I mean. So in the course of, say, a month, a quarter, a year, you get so much positive feedback. And from people that I respect. Okay, I get it from intelligent people I can see are intelligent. So obviously, and you get great comments and just it's mostly. I mean, I can't tell you how many emails I get from people saying, "Michael, you changed my life." So obviously, that is deeply felt, And although I reiterate, I'm not doing it for that. That's not what I do it for. I don't do it for money. I don't do it for any type of responses from the world. I do it because I'm good at it. It's the only thing I can do. And as I say, it was a long series of weird, peculiar steps that even got me to do it in the first place. But yeah, but I know I'm changing people all over the world. Obviously, I am, because they're telling me that is the case.
I appreciate you following your passion and spreading the information that you find. Thank you.
Thank you, love. Thanks for your questions. Very good questions.
All right, Michael, we have another question from a member of the audience. This is George. So, George, take it away, man.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, George.
I guess my question would be maybe twofold or threefold. As a 3D human and as a spiritual being, how do we get in this bloody mess to begin with, and how do we get out of it?
Yeah, these are huge. Now, this question falls under the category of what I call abstract. But these are questions of great meaning to me personally. See, normally in my own career, I don't answer or get into these kinds of questions. I've actively steered away from them because they are so vast, and so huge, and are so all-encompassing, and one has to get into so much stuff. But since I've done the book on philosophy recently, I'm a little bit more receptive to asking some of these questions. I think that, but again, it's so, and again, and I'm also, my hands are kind of tied because as a personalist, and I mean an ardent personalist, I do really subscribe to that idea that the deepest thoughts, about these questions need to ruminate within oneself. So I have lots and lots of things I could say about these subjects, but at the same time, I'm kind of, I'm kind of compromised by the fact that I do believe they should be kept private. And I think that, so let me try and answer it this way. I think that there's very interesting theories about the descent of the soul, right, into matter, and you find this through artwork, you find it in mythology, you find it in, we've already talked one time on a radio show about the metaphor in the Prisoner series, about that whole thing can be taken as the descent of the soul into the world and all the ramifications of that, and him fighting the parents and the authority figures. So this concept we're talking about of the descent of the soul because of some weird violation or some other purpose into this realm, and then having to deal with all these weird, peculiar obstacles. Many schools, both traditionalist and modern, try to comment on this. And there's Western takes on it, and there's Eastern versions of it. And so, like yourself, I've just exposed myself to a lot of it, thinking about it all the time. Then there's another sort of concept of the magical tradition, right? In which there's, say you take the zodiac then as a metaphor of this school of life. And of course, we know that they taught this in ancient Egypt and passed down through the so-called Jews, through the Kabbalism, and what have you, and it was there in the ancient Druids. And that is the concept of the transmigration of the soul, which isn't quite the same as reincarnation. But it is an idea that the soul has taken all the shapes and forms, right? Be it from the fish to the bird to the tree, that it's a kind of pantheism, so to speak. And that now we're in this physical human form because, again, we have to go through these trials. And the school of life was always 12-fold, right? Actually, it's 36. We teach that on the mystery school, the 36 houses of the zodiac, but that's very esoteric. Basically, we know it as the 12 trials, 12 colleges. And as we pass through each of those as a soul, right, from Aries around to Pisces, we have to go through these challenges. And of course, that itself can be broken down into fire, water, air, earth, which then represent the 4 kinds of challenges, because the fire, water, air, and earth are simply metaphors for what? Energy, emotion, intellect, and earth. Like the 4 suits of the tarot. Fire, water, air, and earth is just your physical life, your mental life, your energetic life, and your relational life or spiritual life. So here we are in the matrix of 4. And everyone has their own little take on this. The Kabbalists have theirs. William Blake had his. Another school has theirs. And it's all very fun. The Vedics have theirs. So somehow they're telling us. And then here we have another bizarrity, which is of endless interest. There's only male and female. Right? We have the sexes. That alone is colossal mystery of why there's only the 2 forms. And what is the endless then, the dynamic between the so-called feminine and masculine and male and female. This is another area that's very interesting. But even if we leave that aside and just deal with the interpersonal being, then obviously one has questions about whether there is an afterlife, where did we come from before we were born, the whole mystery of time, the whole mystery of that there's a certainty, which is we were born, we age through time, and we die. And the existentialists want you to look at that. They want you to say, is the concept that your life is finite, is the idea that you're not going to be here forever. Has it dawned on you? For some people it makes them feel impotent, right? That, hey, my power is limited. And I can't in one life enjoy all the pleasures that I'd like to, and I can't do everything and have all the successes, in one life it's just impossible. So does that make a lot of people's ego very weak and impoverished, and then they become sort of submissive people? And as I've said in my work, then those are the people who kind of fall into these agendas where they follow Big Brother. Or another person may completely transform, right, which is the message of Nietzsche and Heidegger and people like that, which is when you realize that your life is finite, there's another action that can come, which is that your life, forget about your death, forget about other worlds, forget about, alien agendas or transmigration of souls. You are here in this thing called the moment, the time, present. That's what you really have control over. By knowing that you're here for one life, can you then become incredibly, vividly aware of the miracle of existence? And so in my journey of, how many years, asking all these questions that you and others also are asking, to me now this existential principle has become infinitely more interesting than all the other sort of, mystical, religious sort of connotations, be they Christian, Jewish, Islamic. I've gone through all of that. I've studied all these things. There's not a path I haven't looked into and studied, and all of the rest of it. To me, that is far less significant than some of these more profound, modern, Western concepts about is your existence in this life of value? Because I have a belief also that if you take care of your spiritual life, then all other things of your life, even the afterlife, will solve themselves, naturally. They'll take their shape, the correct shape. But if you evade, right, Dasein, if you evade your life here on this planet and what it means, and get into all sorts of concepts about metaphysics and God and all, do you see what you're doing? I mean, even in language, Heidegger even warned that even in your speech, even in the chit-chat of the daily life, there's 1,000,001 ways, he said, in which we evade self, evade being. And I agree with him. And one of the ways is a lot of this New Age palaver and a lot of this sort of religious, metaphysical stuff, which basically can go round and round and round and round forever. And I've learned now, and again, this is a very personal statement, but I've learned to be a little bit wary of that. I think intellectually you should be interested in these things, you should study them, but purely as subjects. I don't think that you should, lose sight of the more fundamental and raw, and also infinitely more simple kind of equilibrium or state of seeing, let's just use that term again, way of seeing, you know, which is simple and direct and real and uncluttered by all this, you know, mental cacophony. And so again, this is a personal statement, but I think that, you know, people can mull on that. Because I think that for centuries now we've been getting lost into a lot of these concoctions of other people, these traditionalistic religious models, and even today it creeps in again through New Ageism and all sorts of weird nonsense. And again, selfhood is not being made central. So I think that intellectually these are fascinating questions, and I like to study them very deeply. The whole Eastern system, you know, the Hindu system, as I said, the Vedic systems, and all the sorts of different accounts, you know, and then the Western philosophies as well, all the metaphysical, rationalist, idealist, you name it. It's really interesting to keep up the speed with a lot of that stuff. But at the same time, never forget that the real art of life is in the now. It's in this moment right now. And that was where the focus really needs to be. And I think if you take care of that, and you come to a certain clarity, you know, a certain freedom of thought and clarity in this moment, a lot of other things, you know, will organize themselves correctly, is what I personally believe.
Yeah, I have maybe another question or a comment, and it's more of a from my own personal perspective on life and spirituality and all that kind of stuff. I've always had this deep feeling of being trapped, and not from a from the perspective of I sort of feel also from the experience in that we are like as a soul have been captured and forced to incarnate into our planet. So I don't know if you have any ideas or views on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of these concepts that needs to be looked at. It's what you're talking about there is more of a Gnostic concept, and there's a lot to be said about that, where it came from, and it even goes before the Gnostics. This has its roots, I think, in a lot of Eastern philosophy, but it appears in the Western context in sort of a, you know, esoteric Judaism and esoteric Christianity and Gnosticism. And I do not personally subscribe to it at all, because I'm a disciple of Gerald Massey, and his protege was Alvin Boyd Kuhn, and these people clearly pointed out the logical inconsistency of imagining that your spirit is trapped in matter. Okay, there's a whole thing we could go into, but I've done this in my work. If you refer to some of my other works, DVDs, which are all on slave.com, you'll find me going into this in some detail. And in fact, even in the Disciples of Mysterium book, I go into it again. But they just pointed out the fundamental mistake, a metaphysical aberration of thought that allows us to even perceive that this world around us is some sort of trap for spirit. Right? There's an inconsistency in this concept, and it can be traced back to the priests of Eastern countries who, wanting to gain power over people's minds, came up with these concepts of karma in the way that we kind of associate it today, and also this concept of reincarnation. As I said, slightly different than transmigration of souls. Because in transmigration of souls, the concept of sin does not appear. You know what I mean? It's just the soul almost choosing that it goes through different incarnations. There's nobody over it. There's no God, or no hells and heavens and all of this kind of nonsense, right? But in reincarnation, those Aryan teachings were taken and then inverted into the concepts of karma. And of course, now the priest has complete control, doesn't he? Because he's the only one who can get you out of karma. And you know, he's got a whole big song and dance that you have to do. And suddenly it becomes this big elephant. And then we have the monstrous, horrible situations that we have in Eastern countries, where people, whole traditions have subscribed to this. And there's a few of these Brahmin scum-sucking pigs at the top purveying this, but we still have it in the West, but they're just egregious over there. And then we have that whole cult of the untouchables and different castes of human beings. I mean, who the hell are these people? Because once you bought into the metaphysics of it, right, well, it's only one step away to saying these people are at the bottom of the ladder, and these guys, you know, with the fairer skin are at the top of the ladder, or whatever, you know. Once you bought into the idea that there's a hierarchy in spirit, then it's only 2 seconds before you have a whole jackboot situation down here on Earth. And so I'm I've traced it all back. I mean, I can name names. If you go back to the early Vedic tantric teachings, read people like Marcia, Eliade, and others I could mention. Go back and find the roots of all of these Sikhisms, Hinduisms, and you can find an interesting story there that's completely expert. I recommend highly the work of the Albert Pike, fantastic Asian Orientalist. We know him, of course, in other areas, but he was an immensely erudite expert in all the languages of the East and wrote many fine books on the Vedas, exposing, the complete denigration of the early pre-Vedic Aryan teachings. You see, so get in there, dive in, find out. Don't just buy, what these Buddhists in their yellow robes and this rubbish down there, and the self-realization fellowships, all these bogus organizations that you have all over the world today. None of their teachings have any validity. They were coined only maybe 60 years ago, 100 years ago. They're the biggest liars that you can imagine, It's like, the guys in the white coats, right, perpetuating the medical fraud, telling you lies about how the body works and what illness and disease is, where you've got these bald-headed creeps walking around with their beads and their orange robes. I got no time for them. They're liars through and through. And half the shit that you're reading there is less than 500 years old. It has no antiquity whatsoever. And they know it, but they've hidden the truth. Because of the deceivers, evil deceivers, who have human beings on their knees crawling like dogs in front of them.
Michael, do you think that there's also a distinction that could be made between the fact that we have this, maybe the original creation, like when you go back to your work in Atlantis, we're talking about pre-Diluvian cultures and how maybe we had some more advanced knowledge in the past, and then there was this infiltration that took place, or this sort of predatory assault on the planet and on the people here. And that there has sort of been, people have called it, the Matrix or whatever. There's been this synthetic environment created for us to exist in. Could it be that some of this is referring to a destruction of an original divinity or an original equilibrium, and then because of this infiltration, here we are now in this trapped cycle of, constantly being trapped in this, what you'd call the Matrix? Could you look at it that way as well?
Yeah, of course you can. In fact, that was one of the reasons why the Disciples of the Tsarion book came, because I wanted to reiterate the stuff I had gone into in Atlantis about the origin of the ego. People were asking about the ego. Here's another little part of the story of the ego when you widen the context. The ego is literally, as I said so many times, the ghost that rose out of the grave of the self. Meaning that there's a holistic, original, archaic, right, consciousness. And many, even official scientists, have grasped the fact that this exists. And one can't even begin to describe it. I've got quotes throughout my work from people who talk about it being millions of years old, the organic programming of the biophilia of existence. It's all there in my work. But one thing we can say about it is that there was a break, there was a breach. And that was caused by the incredible physical traumas, like the catastrophe. I'm the first one to really bring this strongly to the plate and in the world. And the important thing to grasp about it is that this ego is a good thing, because the ego is sort of the last, problematic but highly effective little echo, if you will, of that original consciousness. It's part of it, right? And it's the part of us that kept us sort of sane or semi-sane. Now, we know that the ego, in order to exist, has to suppress a lot of stuff, right? There's a whole action of repression taking place, because it acts like a totalitarian. It's a totalitarian structure, very rigid structure. That's why we have, in fact, dictatorships and all the evil that you see in the physical world is based on the psychic tyranny that's taking place. Because one thing leads to the other, isn't it? So the ego, in its widest, concept, and that's why in Disciples of Mysterium, several of the chapters there are to help unpack this thing. We talked about the mind parasite. We earlier got off that subject. But I talk about this concept of the mind parasite in a different way, try and show that there's the ego and plus there's other things in consciousness that are born out of the roots of total psychic collapse. And it's almost impossible to imagine. But then when out of the conflagration, right, this Lucifer arose, I also refer to as Mercurius, drawing on the alchemists who spoke about this in veiled terms. But they're speaking about this horizon, right? Blake called it the horizon. Or, there's so many different ways of defining this being, this level, this kind of frequency of consciousness. And immediately, you're talking about all the other pestilences and all the other, faux pas and all the weird. George was saying it as well. So, but see, all these other things that checkmate us, and all these other things that constitute obstacles of the psyche, and obstacles of existence, obstacles between our happiness, right? Whatever it may be, psychic or social, came about easily after the original trauma took place. So, in other words, even though bad as they are, and some of these things can be tracked historically and what have you, but it's been easy. It's been easy. Right? When David Icke talks about, again, the sheepdog and how easy, it's a dawdle, he calls it, he uses that term a lot. He's right. It's a dawdle. But the only thing is he doesn't explain completely why. You've got to go back. I mean, you can't even imagine a more traumatic thing happening to the psyche of man. And traumatic, why? Because there was a much greater holistic connection to the universe than is today. You find in 2 or 3 shamans in the world? An occasional unique child, or the occasional Mozart or Beethoven or Handel or whatever. It's almost non-existent. And even when we see it in human beings, that's still only a fragment of what I'm talking about. So when that was lost, the feeling of alienation, the feeling of fall, right? Horizon or Albion falling headfirst into the dark abyss of matter, as Blake portrays it, and has been portrayed in Kabbalah and the loss, the blinding, right, of the hero going into the underworld. So many metaphors, even metaphors of physical catastrophe, the plunging of the sun you see into the abyss. There's 101 metaphors for this very thing. And then Horus, the little child, rising again from the ocean, out of the abyss. Well, what the hell is this abyss? Where did this come from in mythology? Well, I'll tell you where it came from. It's the broken shards, the total soup. So it's not a matter of man evolving from some fucking apes. It's that those apes are devolved from what we once were. We have devolved from what we once were, and those apes have devolved from what we once were. We're in a state of massive retrogression. It's not man evolving from that. What nonsense? As they well know. But the point is, ancient peoples existed. And philosophy has not taken this on board, even though Plato, his father, was told by Egyptians, you are people of little consciousness, what do you know? Cycles have come and gone. Man has been great in his past. Other traditions have these teachings. We're not up to speed. So philosophy has not taken it on board, and since they haven't, we can never come to a conclusion about what the psyche is. And science has not taken it on board, even though they've got physical evidence in front of them. But as Michael Cremo has shown, they keep burying it. Don't want anybody to know about it. Graham Hancocks and others have done well to chime in on that. But there's even greater experts than them who have showed this for years and years and years. The incredible conspiracy there, the Smithsonian Institute and all of these people. So there's an agenda to hide who we were before. And anyone who comes out, like Blavatsky, I'm not saying her account of the past is 100% accurate, but look, even if 30% of what she's saying is accurate about a man's ancient past, isn't that revelatory enough? Isn't that interesting? So I don't subscribe to all the theories out there, be it Steiner's account or Blavatsky's account or whoever's account. But I think that I give them a great pat on the back for even coming forth and saying we were perfect. Man is perfect in his origins. Swallow Delubich, man is perfect in his origins. He's descended into what we are. I believe that. I believe that thoroughly. Because one of the greatest mottos I carry, one of the top 4 or 5, of my most favorite mottos, this will be on my gravestone, is that in the lesser is the greater. If you want to know about the highest teachings, the highest reality, you find it in the dirt. You find it in the gutter. You find it in the crime. You find it in the littleness in man. Because everything is contrast. You couldn't have the lesser. You couldn't have the crime. You couldn't have the neurosis, the psychosis, right? The pollution. In that dirt is the sign that there's a greater. Don't look for the greater. You're never going to find it. Because our eyes are not acclimatized to that spectrum. That's not the way it works. It's in the sorrow. It's in the sadness. It's in the misery. It's in, like George is asking, how the fuck did we get into this? Well, you're not in it yet. The diving into the abyss, The crossing, right, the rivers of blood. Are you in it yet? Have you really gone to the heart of the human suffering? When you do, it is there that you find the pearl of great price. It is there that you find the keys of enlightenment. You can't do it by skirting around and theorizing. You must dive down into it. This is, unfortunately, the tragedy and the, in its own sense, the beauty. And of course, I bring that into my work all the time. Can you understand the beauty of the sorrow that you experience, or are you always pushing it away from yourself? There's a whole other dynamic that the human race needs to wake up. It's not morbid, it's not masochistic. It's a different relationship with sorrow, with pain. You will have to go down there into that unspeakable misery, unspeakable crime, unspeakable pathology, you see, because it's in that place. Like C.S. Lewis said, he says, what is God interested in your cries of belief when you're on the peaks of life and everything's going for you well? He says God is only interested in one cry, the cry of the man in the deepest dungeon, the deepest trough of depression and sorrow. That is the cry of the man who says, I believe, I still believe. That is the only believer. Right? Schopenhauer said, without sorrow, without pain, life is meaningless. And the strange thing is, no matter how much you fight that concept, it actually is true. Because the greatest things that have been created, be it art or music, have been created out of the depths of sorrow. Be it sorrow for yourself in your own life, or for humanity's sake, whatever it is. But it is only and only and only when you are able to go into the midst of it and come out alive. And from that place, the lucidity that you've got, from looking at the Medusa's head, right? From seeing the darkest that is of the world, is of man, it's in that smallest and darkest place that the truest light and the highest reality is discovered. But until a person is willing to make that journey and set off, not the what, not setting off on the journey, but the way that one sets off on any journey. It's not the what, it's the way that you set it off, because if the journey opens up in front of you, there is no journey. Your walking creates the path. And so that's why it's an indelibly personal thing. What other people's paths have created, that's their path. There are some gurus saying that's what it's autobiographical. And we come back to this thing about the mind parasite very quickly. Please remember that when you're reading other people's commentary on this so-called mind parasite, and many of them actually make it feel it is some actually physical parasite. There's a theory of going around that it is physical. But whether it's physical or it's spiritual, please understand one thing. There's an autobiographical context to this. In other words, if somebody's telling you that they believe that all human consciousness is controlled by some mind parasite, I suggest that what this really means is that their mind is the one controlled by the parasite, but one of the effects of the parasite is to make you think that it is everyone. Right? There's a certain, it's probably a very bad metaphor, but it's a metaphor that appeals to many psychics. When a psychic person is having visions, and this happens many, many times, of course, many people listening to this will actually know what I'm talking about here, but there's often psychics, or certain psychics in their own life, who go through a period of seeing towers falling, all hell breaking loose, fire and volcanoes, and the earth coming to catastrophe, right? This is a very common thing, by the way. So if you're in that circle of people. And then people go, well, this never happened. This person spent years talking about the ring of fire and the earth changes and nothing ever happened. It's because we've forgotten a simple psychological fact. The person who's predicting this kind of stuff, it's their own psyche that's going through that meltdown, as a matter of fact. And often, in my experience, I've noticed that they, in fact, do become insane, or even temporarily go through a major breach after this, major mental, breakdown. So please note this, that sometimes when a person is out there, like a Cassandra, telling you that all physical catastrophes are going to take place, it's often autobiographical in the sense that it's their psyche, it's their own, they're going through a personal, emotional, or spiritual crisis. Okay? I do readings for people, so I see this a lot more than you probably are aware of. The metaphor applies to this thing about the mind parasite. We may be all under the influence of some weird holographic thing, right? Or some other parasitical entity. Of course, this could be absolutely true, but I would say that if you're under the influence of the parasite, you wouldn't know it. So one of the arguments I use against the mind parasite concept is if you were under the power of such a being, you wouldn't be able to sit there thinking, hey, I wonder if there's a thing called a mind parasite. It's very unlikely. However, the person who admits and insists that this is a reality might themselves be under the power of that And it's not a parasite, it's a form of energy, it's a way of seeing. They themselves may be the victims of it, but with it, now that they have in fact contracted this spiritually, it makes them think that all human beings suffer from this, all right? So watch out for this biographical aspect when you deal with mental aberrations, because mental aberrations, a psychotic person often thinks everybody else is going to do them harm, right? There's a projection aspect to this. And even for other, this needs to be applied to even things like the mind parasite. You know, I mean, one could say a lot more about it, but we really don't have the time.
Thank you for that, Michael. And George, thanks a lot. Did you?
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael.
You're welcome, George. Thank you very much for coming.
We have another question for you here, Michael. I have my beautiful wife, Monica, here. She has a question for you.
Hi, Monica.
Hello. Hi, Michael. I've just been recently introduced to the concept of transhumanism by Max Egan, actually. Just watched a couple documentaries, and I kind of wanted to know your thoughts on it, just because it seems as though these aspects of our psychology are slowly being eroded almost by this idea of man and machine melding together. And I'm wondering if you feel that, or if you know in your studies, that humans have always overcome the greatest of obstacles. I mean, we're being poisoned on every level: food, water, air, genetically, whatever. This transhumanism agenda, this seems to be the next stage, is quite alarming and concerning to me, especially because I myself have a daughter, we have a child, and most of us here have children. That's something that concerns me a great deal. I just want to know your thoughts on it, and has humanity in the past been able to get over and get through that type of obstacle, I guess?
Oh, no, we've never really had to face it before, and I need you to go to my unslave.com website, because I've got my post-humanism 6-hour talk up there that I did in Australia. And so my ideas are very different, very, very different than other people who talk about it. They put the emphasis on the actual technological aspect, you know, like the RFID chips and sort of more of the physical aspects of that level of tyranny. I speak entirely about, I have a little section on the technology aspect, but my slant on it is mostly about the psychological war on consciousness aspect of it, which has never been really dealt with sufficiently as far as I'm concerned. So my work is focused on that, to show how we as people bring it about. The post-humanists have always had their agenda, but you know, originally they were a very, very small, almost eccentric group, you know, in the echelon, in the Illuminati. And even the rest of the Illuminati didn't really sign on to what they were talking about. But this changed. This changed, you know, some people, you can give the date 1920s, whatever, but there was a significant change in which their kind of crazy ideas started being picked up. And we're moving ever closer. But what is being neglected by the people who are teaching on this subject is what we as human beings have done to dehumanize ourselves, right? After the Second World War, what have you, or the rise of America, you know, again, the dates one could argue. But there's been several threads that have happened on a psychological level, a philosophical level as well, and social, to get us to be almost, you know, massaged into shape, sort of tenderized for this post-humanism agenda to come up. And this has very much to do, like you'll hear when you listen to the presentation, about our own relationship with our own selves. The split that we have within ourselves between, say, the social ego, you know, that we show to the world every day, and our inner self. That divide is really the measure of how far we're going to go down this road by believing. Because you and me may not believe in the post-humanism agenda, we're really worried about it, but the 300 million people in America think it's wonderful, right? Because it's sold to them through feminine energy. I talk about how the maternal energy, the archetype of the mother, you know, is used to seduce us into this sense of security. There's a huge symbolism involved in this, huge symbolism. And other ways, right? And it's been done through the centuries. They've done it gradually in the time of Thomas Hobbes and other pundits, and you have these creeps through the media doing it today. Then you have all these movies that are coming out trying to sell you this sort of RoboCop, you know, sort of concept to make it trendy and fashionable. You get the video games for the kids. And then there's what we can do about it. So there's a huge psychological tie into this that needs to be done. But, you know, again, I did this deeply, very deeply in that 5-6 hour presentation. And so definitely, I think you'll love that. You check it out. It's free up on nonslave.com.
Thank you, actually. But I'm just wondering, like, are we going to even have the capability of seeing this sort of agenda unfold and recognize it, change it? I'm kind of worried about the new generation. I mean, we always, as a human race, always end up asking, who are we, what are we, why are we here? But I'm kind of concerned that that's kind of eroding. Like, the decisions are being made for us, especially the younger generation. I'm really concerned about that. I guess I just want to know if the human psyche can get through all of that, because now we're talking about a technological impairment on the psyche, you know, as sort of like an infiltration. You know, with wireless waves and stuff. I mean, we don't even know how damaging that is to our brains. So I guess I just wanted to, you know, clarify or get your opinion. I'm definitely going to check out your presentation on that for sure.
Well, the physical aspect of this colonization is very much to be. I said earlier about the foods we eat and certainly the mercury. And what's coming across the television. I've worked for years about the subliminal content of billboards and magazines. And I mean, the onslaught on the human mind can never be underestimated, right? And it works, so that's why they keep doing it. And I've focused on, you know, a couple of aspects. Other people have, you know, shown expertise in others. One person can't cover the whole thing. But I must again say that no matter, even if you were to knock on the head, you know, because there's certain physical things you can buy and get that stop, you know, some of the physical pestilence. But see, even though you may have got that out, you know, by having ozone machines and having, you know, a great deal of gadgets, and you may be serving yourself well to stop some of the physical pestilence, what about the stuff that they're doing subconsciously, psychologically? What about the stuff that they're doing through the subliminals, you know? So there's obviously a vigilance that is required. And I said that parents, you know, we in general do need to be up to speed with all of these techniques. But earlier on, we were even talking about why, you know, when Pat's question was about inaction and fear to act, fear to get up and do anything. What you're talking about actually ties into this because of the overall drip feed down through the years, taking away the will of people to change things, right? And so when we don't act, they act. If you don't occupy the white squares of knowledge, they will. So we have been, like you said, we're even losing the hardwiring now to even ask moral questions. We're unable, because it's been handed to us. Tying into what Pat was asking about, why inaction? Well, why would you act? You have had your will stolen. You have an allegiance, a subconscious allegiance with Big Brother. Big Brother hands you illusions of newness, but only hands you more of the same, right? Subscribes to social fantasy, appeals to social fantasies. We have a subconscious dislike of change ourselves. And we're about 5 minutes old from having kings and priests to look up to. Right? We call ourselves modern. 5 minutes ago, we lived in communities in which you did as you were told, and by God did you do that. And you were punished immensely severely for not doing so. So the idea of even freedom, as we know it today, is incredibly short-lived. Then you factor in, right, this concept of the trauma that we talked about with the ego, the fragility of what it is to be conscious. We identify with that strength. We identify with those father figures. If we don't have one, we'll one another. And so these people know this. They know how to work on us, to sell us the idea of globalism and transhumanism. It's all psychology. I think that the physical side should definitely be taken care of. We're gadget fixated. Yes, I'm worried about that. But I'm infinitely more worried about the subliminal allegiance that we have, right? Because ultimately, as I've said from day one in my work, all of this tyranny can be deconstructed, boiled down to a war on consciousness. And it is, for me, that's what I go, hoarse talking about. Other things are interesting, but they're far less interesting on the war on consciousness itself, because that's what the real war is. But unfortunately, that also entails our allegiance. It's a dance. We are, in some way, submissive and conformist in many of the things that we do. And we buy into even purchasing the money power that we have. It's one of the things that we can deconstruct this life, is what we do with our money and so on. So, but on all levels, but I'm talking more about psychological. So how do we then find the immunity? there's where Ayn Rand and people like that come in, because she's saying, look, unless you learn to really define what evil is, right? If something keeps eroding your concept of what immorality is and what evil is, in the end you won't even remember what good is. You won't even know what good is, and that's where we're at right now. We're teetering on the edge where the average child is working from such a, they're not immoral, they're amoral, they don't even know. Now there's many reasons for this, but the teaching of a child discernment, well, you can't teach it, but you can bring it out of them, right? This whole concept of being able to smell evil a mile away is eroding. And so people sign on for horrible, horrible things. You know, I'm always showing posters and mottos from these, you know, advertisements and things. Do you see what this is saying? And people don't. You know, we've been trying to awaken people up to just see what's right in front of them. But unfortunately, it will always be only a small group of people. It's never going to be the whole of mankind, because people are victims of complete, not only hypnosis, right, sort of a mind control, as we've always used the term, right, but auto-hypnosis. I don't seem to be able to get this through people's heads. It's not just a simple matter of you know, brainwashing and collective mind control. There's also the factor of auto-hypnosis, the ability of a person to hypnotize themselves. Meaning that we have ideas about ideas. We have ideas about the world, and we have ideas about our ideas about the world. We're not actually in touch with the world. We're not actually in touch with reality. You know, our forefathers were much more in touch with reality, in touch with animals, in touch with husbandry and the cycles of nature. We live in these bloody artificial cities and artificial houses. Isn't that a form of imprisonment? So, you know, as you'll see more, as we unpack it more in the presentation, you'll have all your answers there, because we went into that in great, great depth.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Michael.
Hi, Michael. Just going on a little bit more of what you were just talking about there. Here's a question from Aaron from Conspiratorium. What are your thoughts about the laws of nature and the importance of them as something that undergirds education?
Well, the first thing to realize about nature, and this has been brought up by so many people, is that it's change. In fact, the first thing to bring, and when we say nature, we mean the whole of everything, the totality of human existence, the natural world, the universe. It starts as one thing, becomes something, and then moves on to be something else. This is a continuum, a flux. So some of the philosophers tell you that how can you imagine as a scientist or an empiricist, a materialist, that you can have a fixed point of understanding when everything, including your own perceptions, are changing momentarily, right? The rationalists talk about, well, the earth is lower. As we said, when you die and go to heaven, then you'll have the perspective on all of reality. You couldn't possibly hope to have it now because you're a fucking sinner. And God just doesn't, you know, care to give you the insight. Or perhaps if you become a monk, you know, for 50 years or whatever, you know, they sell you all this rubbish, right? But the idea that they're telling you to be removed from this world before you can ever have a perspective on what the soul is or what life is, you know, this is, you bought this rubbish. And then the scientist is telling you, well, wait, because we don't have the answers now, but we're getting there. And so they're really basically telling you that you in your own individual life ain't going to crack it. Then there's another school of people, we'll talk about that in the last chapter of the Disciples in the Tsarion book, about an entirely different kind of intuitive and imaginative oracle of understanding, which can completely transcend this rational mode. Not that reason is bad, believe me, it's not. But reason is limited in certain senses, right? Because reason has a way of grasping. It's a filter and antenna that has certain properties. And that's fine, it's good. Because it faces reality and it works out what's true and false. But when we're dealing with the totality of experience, right, all the different weird things that go on inside our minds and hearts, and then all this weird other stuff that goes on, reason is just simply too limited an antenna to grasp it all and to work it out and to percolate. There's a lot going on in the psyche. So imagination, intuition, these are the things that are again being shut off when your wife was asking there about the post-humanism agenda. That's right, that's what they want us to do. They want to get us into our ego, you know, they want to get us into the consensus trance. They want to get us to step out of our own intuitions and imaginations by just tearing down and emaciating the children, giving them all these weird creepy messages that come across the television, what have you. And so we are no longer being exposed to great art, great literature, great music, so that we then take off from that and start using our own imaginations, you know? Because the great literature and the great music and the great art stimulates that part of our consciousness. So when you deal with nature, you find the first thing is change, flux, continuum. Things starting as one thing, becoming something else, right? And then moving on to become something else. I mean, everything that you look at is in a state of transition. Even the metal. Everything that you think is permanent is actually in the process of becoming something else. And therefore, your understanding of a thing is time dependent. And then as Ponty and other people brought out so beautifully, then to every single thing that you observe, whether it's yourself or an object in the world, or even a set of ideas or whatever it might be, there's 101,000,001 perspectives also, right? Because if everything's in change, then you never have the same perspective. One. So something has happened, and I think it's because of this trauma to the ego, trauma that we had to the whole consciousness. We have now become disciples of a mysterium, disciples of reason, in the sense that we force this order, right, this superficial order, this superimposed order of fixity, hierarchy on a moving thing. Call it yin, call it yang, masculine, feminine. You can Nagwa and tonal. There's 1,000,001 languages for this. But the main thing is something is moving, something is changing, and we don't like that. And so human being, by being insecure or what have you, has imposed a matrix of samity and a matrix of order, false order, on nature's order. And that's God. God is all part of this as well. Science is part of this. You know, we'll have all the answers. No, God is static. We change, He's the same. He's the ruler of the universe, you know. All of these kinds of things that we do to create a sort of order. Whereas the Nietzsches and other people are asking you to plunge into the so-called chaos. In other words, they're saying, you know, like you're talking about the dark side further on, you can't see the light if you don't have the dark side. Well, the dark side is the concept of this everlasting change. And how you work with that, how you allow it to work with you. There's a question on the Facebook about magic. Somebody asked a question, it was Jeremy, about does magic exist? You know, he was talking more about just your normal little Ouija board rituals and ceremonial magic. Does it work? That's where I think he was coming from, but I can enlarge upon that. Because he was saying, is there even such a thing as magic? And of course there's magic. The very fact that you live and breathe, that you wake up in the morning, every single aspect of your life, let alone how your body operates, the cells, you know, the skin, everything about your body's existence is a form of magic. But more specifically to his question is this: there are not just one form of magic. He was talking there about, you know, can you get things done when you want to enhance your will through ceremonial magic? Maybe you can. There's many forms of magic. The ceremonial magic of which he's talking is mostly, you know, when you look at people doing it, it's mostly just to fulfill lower ego needs, isn't it? And that's okay. Maybe they want to do that. That's fine. Get a new car, become a famous person, have all these lovers. I don't know what they want to think of. You know, skin a cat or something. It's lower level bullshit that is just basing your ego needs. But the higher magician knows that in satisfying your ego needs, that could jeopardize you later on a soul level, because you can have all these ego needs, and by catering to your ego, you become a lesser, deeper human being, isn't it? What's so great about that kind of magic? Then there's the higher magic, in which we spoke of earlier. You're dealing with your spirit. You're dealing with the higher causes, the higher clarity, praying for clarity, doing rituals to say, can I see reality for what it really is? When you deal with your spiritual needs, all the lower needs will also work out. This is the true message of even in the Kabbalah, they've got the path of the serpent, which is going through all the stages slowly, or the path of the arrow, which goes straight up. So we have two ways, right? You have strength card, and you've got the chariot, the austere, yogic, rigid way of doing things, which is symbolized by the chariot, and then the ecstatic tantric way, right, with the woman and the lion. And in Crowley's deck, it's magnificent art. There's the carefree letting go, right? It's the total tantric understanding, which was the origin of all religion. And in that card, he's showing, it's called lust. He even changed the name because it's saying, I'm one with the universe. I'm letting the universe flow through me, and I'm flowing through it. The question of asceticism and yoga and rigidity and focus of ego needs and all of this, I'm going to conquer. This is all thrown out the window. And the person replaces this nonsense with a living, vital, some have called it feminine, yin approach to life, in which there's an openness to that spontaneity. What is the real magic? You affecting matter or observing how matter affects you on a daily basis? You have affected the water by drinking it, but that water has also affected you by being absorbed into your body. We only notice what we have affected, but that's the magician sees with both eyes. He don't only see with one eye. So the magicians you have walking around today are only concerned about how they wave their wands to affect matter in their favor. None of them are aware of how matter, how life, how reality, how changes every day affect themselves. And the real magic is exactly that. How nature, how the universe, how very peculiar laws, traits, modes of existence, changes in your life, challenges, obstacles, change and affect yourself. That's where the higher magic is. But don't forget also, maybe this constitutes a bit of a warning, and that is that all magical practices merely amplify who you are in the end. So those who want to practice these magical arts better realize that you'll be meeting yourself tomorrow. Because those are just tools to amplify who you are on an ego level and on a spiritual level. Right?
Okay.
I think, again, to reiterate one other point, the final point on magic is that real magic, the highest magicians are the people who are aware of how little control they have over things. It's a total reverse of what we think. The true magician is the one who knows you cannot walk on the same piece of water twice. Right? It's lust. It's that card. It's number 8. He gives in to the flow of the elements. He becomes elemental. He doesn't try to, like the hermit. That's rubbish. Or the magician. He's not trying to affect anything. He's too busy observing something else. Some other incredible magic that's taking place. And the real magic is to clear your eyes and clear your senses, of all the things that stand in the way of you observing the inherent perfection both in yourself and in the universe. Once as I said, the doors of perception are cleansed, man sees things as they are infinite. That is the only magic there is. The rest is just some ego bullshit.
Okay, bringing up magic and I guess the study of alchemy, I want to bring up the topic of science. In today's day and age, personally, I use science a lot in discovering things about nature, about my existence, about who I am. I don't like anything that I listen to and learn from. I take from it what I think is right or what I think is true. But do you think that there is room for science and scientific inquiry in today's day and age? Does it serve a purpose? Does it serve a beneficial purpose for one to discover who they are?
Yeah, it does. And remember, we couldn't even be sitting here talking. I mean, you don't want to be big alien about this, but we are creatures of our age. We do live in a technological and scientific age, and it's a damn good thing. The people who are abusing those sciences, the people we addressed, they're not the only people that you have. You've had great scientists on through, and even today you have the Arthur Koestlers, and you have the Sheldrakes, and the Bohms, the Niels Bohrs, and so many other great scientists. So, Hans Alfvén from Sweden. I mean, you've got immense knowledge there of an alternative nature. Then you've got all that free energy. Then you've got the Wilhelm Reichs, right? Whole body thing. So that's science. You need that. You need to know that. You need to know about the proteins, and you need to know about the cells, and you need to know about structure and all. So science is part of our existence. It should be taught to children. It should be, it's a form of exploration. But we have a bunch of pretty much satanic, materialists, people of incredibly low vibration and aberrant thinking about disease. How they think about disease and how they think about cure, how they think about the body. My God, you see, one of the greatest tyrannies of all is how the body itself, the physical body, is perceived. And to try and pry loose people from all walks of life, teachers, religious types, Christians, Jews, Muslims, some of the concepts they have just pertaining to the physical body are so utterly dreadful, right? You know what I mean? And of course, that ties in with their vision even of the planet that they're on. And the whole idea we talked about a little earlier about how the Earth is a cage of the soul and all of this stuff, right? Which has to be deconstructed. It has to be deconstructed. And my work focuses a lot on that very question. But science is just, incredibly important. Incredibly important. We live in a technological age. I'm all for it. And we need to use it for the right purposes.
So would you agree then there should be an emphasis put on in today's day and age on backing scientists that are going to really spend a lot of time and resources investigating things like human energy, earth energy, what would have been always classified as metaphysical science? Do you think that it's a worthwhile endeavor for institutions such as colleges and universities around the world to put a lot of emphasis into human aura, chakra systems, what would be considered an esoteric or a metaphysical science? Do you think that that should be brought to the forefront?
Yeah, why not? It's been pushed into the corners for so long. People like Wilhelm Reich, he's one of my biggest mentors. His teachings, teaching of cosmology from Hans Alvane and people like that, free energy. I'm for anything that fights evil. I'm for anything that deconstructs the power of these leviathans, be it the federal orgs, or be it the AMA or the FDA. We have people like, Raymond Royal Wright. We got Tesla machines, so I'm completely in favor. I've used all of this stuff and I know it works. And so, absolutely, I'm a huge believer in that. And remember, the science that we have today is basically false science. It has a materialist agenda running through it, and that was because so many scientists through the ages have been suppressed who had an alternative vision. I mean, they were completely suppressed. It was Baconian, Newtonian, even Einsteinian, for that matter, lies, the Darwinian modalities. So in other words, a general rule of thumb is that if it's taught today, it's largely full of lies. Not all of it, but a lot of it needs to be deconstructed, and there needs to be a major revolution when it comes to bodily health, the origins of disease. This is crucial because, as I said, one of the biggest threats we're going to have right now is the rise of pathogens, because they're becoming immune to the medicines, and the antidotes that are being given. So within a very, very short time, we're going to see skyrocketing. In America, it's already skyrocketing, by the way, but it's even going to become worse across the world. In Eastern countries now, people are suffering immensely because the antibiotics that they're giving them for these malarias and whatever other, S. aureus and all of these different diseases is just simply not working anymore. So there's a huge crisis.
I want to ask you one more question, and then Dave will do a Facebook question. In your opinion, what happened 2,000 years ago with the Library of Alexandria? Are those records still around? Do you have any information pertaining to that? And if so, what was contained in the Library of Alexandria? Was it true science?
Yeah. In Pergamon, Alexandria, where's the other? Carthage. Alexandria wasn't the only one. There was innumerable libraries around. Samarkand, you name it. And in the rest of Egypt now, let's include Luxor, Temple of Luxor, and what have you, Memphis. The libraries you're talking about all the knowledge of the Druids. The people I call the Druids aren't just located on the Western Hemisphere. These was a worldwide Aryan civilization who had written down enormously. So one of the biggest lies is that the Egyptians didn't write anything down. That whole lie about hieroglyphics. That's a total nonsense. How can you have mathematical constructs and have it in your head and not write it down? It's ludicrous. If you have the geometry to build a pyramid, you better believe that somebody wrote that down. So of course they had the writings, but that's all been sequestered. So I believe that some of the occult societies, the Vatican, but even more sinister, the College of Cardinals, as I said, that should never be identified with the Vatican. They're connected, but they're not just the same. Those gangsters, and then the Atnists, Luciferians behind them, right? These people have it, and they don't allow access to it to anyone but themselves, because it's so profound. It's the ancient Aryan teachings, right? So your lower level Jews and your lower level Christians and your lower level Freemasons, they haven't got open hell. You've got to rise so high. I'm not saying that some very, very few, and in centuries from those lower groups, maybe have a little access. But most of the stuff that these Jews are talking about in their occultism, the Christian occultism, somebody asked a question about Christian mysticism, the Meister Eckhart's, the Jacob Boehm's. It's very interesting stuff, but it's very, very erroneous, and it's very, very weak. I've said a couple of times about the Rosicrucian tradition. In fact, I'm going to be putting up another little in the series of the occult history of Ireland, the shorter. This is not the same thing as my Irish origins of civilization. It's a subset of that called the occult history of Ireland. I've done one or two, and they're up on Slave Films, my YouTube channel. I'm doing another one shortly. It'll go into this quite a lot. But the Rosicrucian groups are ostensibly Protestant on the surface, right? I mean, even Martin Luther was known to be a member of them. But these people were only Protestant on the outside. They're key members, the key founders of the Rosicrucian movement were controlled, I believe, by the College of Cardinals, right? There's just like the old story we must know by now, right? Create your own enemy, right? Create the foe enemy by your own funding. So that's what that was. But within even the Rosicrucians, what is central to Rosicrucianism? Alchemy. And in alchemy, you've got that little story about the journey of the soul through the 12 steps and all. So there's Druidism, the tree, right? Look how much the tree of life. Look at the 3 steps, Negredo, Albedo, Rubedo, right? So all Druidism is encapsulated by people who hadn't the faintest idea what the real Druidism was about. So when you're going into alchemy and you're reading all about it, the chemical wedding and the Hieros Gamos and the Mercurius, these are people who are basically a cartoon version, right, of the ancient Aryan teachings. It's the same for what we call Egyptology. It's the same thing what we call Kabbalism. It's the same what you call tarot research, astrology. It's just like way, you need to piece together, my life's work is to try and piece together, with the help of other great scholars, of course, some of the core tenets of this. But it's like pulling teeth. Ultimately, these occult societies, the top boys have the truth. And they are very, very preserving of it. So the Freemasons, these organizations, individuals within them who've got a great brain have gone on and found out some great, great stuff. Like I said, Albert Pike and so many other names I could mention. Godfrey Higgins, Gerald Massey. There's a whole slew of great Masonic writers, so to speak, that we can find out enormously powerful treasures from. Okay, so it's not that great writings aren't there. They are, but they're hard to find, and it takes a lot of time to read these people. And like I said, they swallowed the Lubitches and what have you. But the real stuff that came out of the places you're talking about, sacrilege, the ransacking of Egypt, the ransacking of Pergamon, of the Indus Valley. Have you any idea of how Pakistan factors into this, the Mohenjo-Daro? Right? Let alone Benares. Have you any idea what's there even today, let alone what was there in the past, under these bloody Brahmins? The great Aryan teachings that arrived in India, where are they? See, so the whole, not to mention what was in Ireland and England, all of this has been sequestered by the Atmas, the Luciferians. As I said, they are dealing with a corrupted, cannibalized, way lower, more solar, they put a solar mask on it, but it's so intriguing when you get in there. And so we have all of these people today running around thinking this is real magic and joining the Freemasons and wearing their rings and their checkered ties and all the rest of it. And I haven't the faintest idea what any of this stuff represents. Very, very unaware of what it really relates to, because that dragon court is still in existence, and they make sure that very little leaks out. Doesn't mean that nothing leaks out. There's been wonderful ones. Look at the work of Ralph Ellis. I mean, you just got to read Ralph Ellis, and you're well on your way to understanding a great deal of what the hell has been. Ahmed Osman, I could name some contemporaries that are monumental in what they've discovered. You know what I mean? So, there has been fantastic work to uncover the truth, to swallow the Lubitsch. But for 30 years, his books wasn't even translated on purpose so that the West wouldn't know. Other books are extremely hard to find and very expensive and what have you. So it's an ongoing. So that's why I try to feature so many of these people in my work. My works are voluminous because I'm featuring all of these works: the Kersey Graves, the James Wheelises, the Alvin Boyd Coons, the Gerald Massey's. My whole astrotheology book is basically an extrapolation of Gerald Massey's great teachings to bring that man's work to the forefront. In other work like Irish Origins, it's just jam-packed. Conor McDorry, Anna Wilkes, what's his name? Ignatius Donnelly, right? Commons Beaumont. I mean, my God, people, the names are unheard of. Now you're hearing about it everywhere you look. Yeah. These were unknown names before I start writing about them. And I'm glad to see that people are not dipping into the works to find out the true history of Britain, the true history of Africa, the true history of Egypt, the lies that have been told and the partisan lies, you know, and the power of these oligarchs. But never forget, just again to reiterate, this extreme elite Luciferian cabal, they have the true Aryan teachings that they stole from these sacred sites. Samothrace, Benares, you name it. They've got it all. But it's taken them centuries to read it and go through it and decipher it. They're thickheads. They didn't know what it is. But they're piecing it together, and it's called the occult tradition. Some of it filters down, a little bit filtering up. But my God, in the end consensus, they've got so much information about the nature of the universe, the stars, the yugas, God. They've got it all there. We're getting little, you know, we're out there like some crazy freaking, you know, what do they call them? What do they call these 49ers? Out there with our pants trying to grab a little bit like some demented 49er. Trying our best to, you know, dig through the grains of sand, the bones that they've thrown us. But believe it or not, you can still do a lot of work with those rotten bones. You can still piece together a pretty interesting story. You know, it's not the whole story, but my God, I think as a human race we've done very, very well. I'm very proud of the work that's been done through the centuries. It's actually the full prime motive of why I do things. We talked earlier about my motives. The main motive is it's a tradition. I'm so enamored by the great work that's been done by predecessors that I don't want their graves to go on unattended. I don't want their knowledge to, you know, fall on just be wasted. To try to bring it up for people, and hopefully something will come of that.
And Michael, when you're talking about when we're talking about these ancient destructions of this knowledge, I mean, this is something that continues up to this day. I mean, you think back to the invasion of Iraq and how the fact that they, you know, visited some of the museums and looted those museums and that knowledge. And so this got to be something that's continuously ongoing. And do you think that that's maybe some of the motivation behind a lot of these invasions and the imperialist, you know, movement to conquer these lands is to gain more access to this knowledge and maybe even some advanced technology?
Yeah, there's definitely, that's been going on for centuries. Where, like for instance, just study the history of Salisbury Plain. You know where the giants were Stonehenges? Just study the amount of military action alone since the First World War on Salisbury Plain and you'll see the desecration I'm talking about. They can't leave a place alone. The lies they've told about Ohio in America, right? The coming of the Vikings and even the pre-Arya, the lies they told about the mound builders there, right, with Barry Bell, tried to expose, and some others are doing right now. I mean, Josh Reeves has just done a monumental, are you familiar with Josh Reeves' work? He's done a great video on the history of the ancient ruins in America. So there's a few things. I have to go to Josh Reeves' website, watch his video. He's a good colleague. And I'm telling you, you know, people need to dip into this. The immense amount of lies they've told us about the Native American Indians, about the Aboriginals in Australia, about the Africans in Africa, you know, who was original. And all of these tribes said that there was fair, blonde, blue-eyed predecessors. They themselves were telling you this. It's in their own mythologies. Oh, but when the British establishment got in, they excised that. They corrupted, right? They edited the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and all these other world races that spoke about the gods. They just silenced them. And so when modern scholars got this, and you're talking about wars, I would even go so far as to say that the Second World War erupted because of the findings of some of these German archaeologists and anthropologists at the time. Now I can't prove that, and but all I can tell you is that these Schielmans and Waddells and a whole host of other, and many of them were actually from Germany, bizarrely, who had gone into the field and were uncovering the truth about the world history. Some of the stuff I've been doing in my Irish Origins, right? This was coming out in the early part of the 19th century, the 20th century. And so, for all you know, to stop that, the Luciferian cabal, both in Vatican and in London, declared war on Germany to obliterate the knowledge that some of these people were coming up with. And then what they did, they put their own little freak class, these zootheology psychopaths, right? These neo-Nazi sort of not neo-Nazi, but a Nazi sort of agenda, their eugenics and all of that. That's British-funded lunacy. but that was overlaid upon some very incredible findings. Okay, so the British establishment has been telling so many lies about the history of America, North America, and luckily, you know, again, a great work has been done to refute it.
Well, getting onto that topic a little bit more, we have a question from Facebook from Emily, and she was saying she was hoping to discover some more information about the Nagas of ancient India, and if there's a connection with them and the Nordic races, and are there any books on this?
Yeah, well, she should read my Atlantis book. I got an appendices in there that's mind-boggling on that subject. The Nagas are very ancient, but just the study of that word, just the study of that word alone opens up a whole can of worms. It's a little bit dated for me because, you know, I wrote that book many years ago, so it's not as fresh as some other stuff. But yeah, there's so much information on that on the internet. Basically, serpent people. And that ties in hugely to my work because there's been a very misconception, a problem. You find this problem a lot, but it's very particular in this idea of whether there was actually serpentine people or was the serpentine thing a metaphor for the genetic science. For all you know, it could have been a bit of both. But I kind of brought to the table through my mentors that, look, I'm less concerned whether it was serpentine people, like this more where David Icke comes in. He kind of beat that to death about the actual reptilian beings. To me, I think they do exist. I think there's plenty of evidence to say that they exist. And in my work, I endorse that they exist. But my focus was more on the serpent as a metaphor for the high science of the alien brotherhood. None of the originals are alive today, but that knowledge is passed on through what I refer to as the dragon court. Actually, that term was first coined by William Brownlee, Brotherhood of the Snake, and then Lawrence Gardner using this fine term, the dragon, because there actually was one. There is actually something called the dragon court. And they're the ones, as I said, are above the College of Cardinals. They run the College of Cardinals. The College of Cardinals then rules the Jewish fanatics. Well, Judaism is basically a subset of Catholicism, not religious of Catholicism, but the whole edifice of what we know to be the College of Cardinals. They invented that as they invented Protestantism. The Jews then, in order to further their agenda, hire the nihilists and the lower level commie, socialist maniacs, right? They go around bombing the hell out of everyone. So there's a hierarchy. So there's a hierarchy of control. Each one not even knowing who the master is. It's like that Number of the Beast, you know, Iron Maiden cover where everybody's on strings, nobody can tell who's above who. And that's the Demeter, that's the whole Gnostic way. The Gnostics sort of understood this, that the Archons at the top run the shop through this incredible hierarchical methodology. But you remind me of what you were asking?
She was just asking about the Nagas and the relation to the Irish Celts and any of that, like what you were going into in the Irish origins of civilization. Is that like what the correlation is there?
From east to west, Poseidon, the western god, on his chariot with his serpentine tail, the mermaids, the sirens, right? In Scandinavian mythology, it's all over the place. Moving east, you find the same thing, all the way through Greek and Roman. Right, into Egypt, you find the hybrid beings. In India, they turn up the Nagas as just one group, and there's an enormous story there. So it's up to a person to decide whether these are actually mythical beings that actually did exist. One of the other concepts that I had was that because the war, when we talk about the war of the gods, we must always remember that it was a nuclear war. It wasn't just a bunch of spear chucking stuff. That's another lie they've given us. There's evidence to show that nuclear weapons, atomic weapons, were being used in the ancient times. They excised all of this from the ancient scriptures, right? Well, we know then that there's fallen. So if you read the parts that were taken out of the Mahabharata and Ramayana, they're talking about the effects of fallout. So there could be then these, the whole concept of mythology where we hear about these hybrid beings and minotaurs and centaurs and, you know, sirens and weird dragon creatures and even Krishna being all blue or patchy. Like a Parsifal is meant to be all patchy, or these sort of giants that hide under the ground because they're seeing, you know, is aberrant, or these cyclopean beings and what have you. I would look at all of that as being even vampirism, meaning anemic. Right? Could not a lot of this be the simple effects of radioactive radiation? So we can look to science to even answer a lot of this stuff. Then we've got the more esoteric, theory about whether or not such beings existed. I think they did. Then you have the other theory about whether the metaphorical aspect that is much more sinister about, and I'll be getting into this into the female Illuminati as well, because it ties into the Tree of Life metaphor. That metaphor can be taken several different ways. We talked about this before. And there's another very interesting way that it can be taken. But does this serpent symbol then represent this high science of being able to manipulate not only the biology of man, right, his genes, but his mind? Ultimately, in the first book I wrote, Atlantis, I always fused those two together. We haven't spoken about that yet, but when I spoke about Age of Catastrophe and World Upheaval, right, terrestrial upheaval, in the first book I'm always having that run side by side with a second form of trauma, which was the trauma of the experimentation that was done on our bodies. So it wasn't just the eruption of the Earth. I believe there was even a second trauma that was equally, if not equally, very, very similarly traumatic, which was the simple intervention, simple invasion of our biology, probably lasting over decades, even if not centuries, changing us from who we were, cutting off, our original umbilical connection to the matrix. Right? All of these things have happened, which I believe that the Book of Enoch and all of these other texts are talking about. They're clear. I don't think there's any other interpretation for it, and they're not the only ones. I'm not just talking about scriptures. There's so many other works throughout the world that talk about this. And not to mention the ones that they probably hidden away that we would never ever hear about. You know what I mean? But now, when you look in the movies, how they drop these messages, there's a lot even in modern day to tell us, oh my God, this is just fiction. No, this is coming out. Remember that archive that we said they've sequestered? They do often let certain writers and thinkers that are hired by them to filter it down in the form of. I forgot to mention this earlier. They do communicate some of that secret knowledge, that gnosis, but they do it through the movies and they do it through, cartoons and what have you, and sometimes fiction. It filters down to us through these great movies. One has to be very, very aware of that these films are actually giving you information of monumental levels. Because, they not only use stories from these fat, crazy monks, but they have psychosis and they write all these weird, H.R. Giger, weird. So they use that. They actually use that. I actually believe a lot of these slasher movies and Hammer House of Horror movies are actually based on the scripts. I've said this many times. That these Jesuits, who they're so psychotic. A lot of them who were locked away in these monasteries for years, probably even in the 18th century and 17th century. They're so crazy, right? They're seeing all sorts of devils and weird stuff. And a lot of them were literate. They wrote this stuff down. Now it's been sequestered for hundreds of years. And then they let a bunch of guys in modern day go through it. And from that comes a lot of the crazies. Then what they do is they push that through an Anne Rice or a Stephen King, on our today, right? To make it look like, it's coming from his brain. But some of that shit is so occult, so fucking evil, that it is not coming from the mind of one person. It's coming out of something way, way weirder than that. Well, that's just a bunch of psychos that have signed on to their religion. There's even another higher gnosis that they allow to percolate down through your movies, like your Gladiators and your, Indiana Jones and the whole, all that we know, all these great, great movies, even The Matrix. Be very, very conscious. I'm glad to see that people are very up to speed on that one in the last 10 years. That's bloody great, because those movies, my God, they are actually one pipeline into this sort of gnosis we talked about.
Michael, do you think this gnosis and this knowledge, referring back to the snake, the dragons, all of the mythical creatures, I just can't help it. I take my daughter to school every morning. She's 7 years old. I walk down the hallway. I look at the artwork from the kids. And literally every other picture I see is of either angels or of dragons. Do you think that gnosis is passed along biologically? Is it part of a more like a collective unconscious that's passed down from generation to generation? And is this the trauma that you say that we are subjected to and we live through? So is this knowledge more passed down, or is it learned?
It's both. And the most thing in my work is always trying to insist that it's going on all the time. When we walk in our streets, why is this street called Meridian? That's an astrological term. Why is this street called Polaris? Why are the churches designed this way? Why are the logos of banks designed this way? Right? Try to decode it. You said that you see nothing but angels and serpents. Did you know that the word for angel, seraph, the seraphim and cherubim, actually interpret one of the interpretations of it is bright serpent? So of course you're going to see angels and serpents together. The symbology, the etymology of the two words is very, very hidden. And angel means messenger. So does serpent. The serpent and priests were the messengers of the techniques that they held. Collins Bowman, one of the most astounding parts of his work, is he that believed that one of the great sources of technology that was in Egypt in ancient times was military weapons, literally guns. He says it's right there in front of you. The rods of iron, all the time in the Bible, and then in the book of Job and in the destruction of Jericho. He is saying that it's right there in front of you, the very early attempt to communicate that there was firearms being used in ancient times. See, so it's again, through misinterpretation, through bad interpretations of the Bible, of some of these terms. But getting to the heart of your question, one of the biggest problems that we face, right, where we may end up losing, is central to my work about the fact that we are being subliminally controlled. Right? It's a war on consciousness, and it's going on all the time. It's going on through the billboards, the movie posters, the movies themselves. And so we have to then decide for ourselves, as parents, whether we even subject any of our children or ourselves to it at all, or whether by going cold turkey, that's even worse. So down through the years, I've always been asked that question about, do we turn it off? And then, the problem with that is, then we build no immunity. Our children have no immunity. But at least exposing them to it intelligently, we're turning on something very powerful in them. And we're also giving hope. We're not being paranoid. They're saying, no matter how much evil they're spilling, the human soul is more powerful. So by turning a child's mind onto it, and again, I can't make the decision for each person. They have to decide whether they're going to go, look, I don't want to be having my people exposed to this at all, or no, I think we should be exposed to it to a certain degree, because that will build consciousness. It will build a rational understanding, and that's very powerful. That's very, very strong. To be able to decode why, like in these Muppet shows or even Sesame Street, what do these archetypal, they look like puppets, but what do they represent? And why are they always using numbers? And what do these numbers represent? And get into it, as people have been doing. And then the more sophisticated stuff, And remember, not all the messages are bad. So don't become paranoid to say, well, every movie, if it's transgressive, like Fight Club, it was a good film. There's some very good stuff out there. It's not all bad, So there's mythical stuff there. There's some stuff that's very healthy to watch. So it's not all bad. But when you see this demonic stuff, especially in these Levi commercials, or just this hideous, monstrous, inane, superficial, lower brain, psychotic, sick, demented stuff, each person has to decide whether they're going to expose their kids to it. I think a golden rule is probably until the age of 5 or 6 to not bother, because it's just so damaging that it's just crazy. And by the way, they're going to have enough time exposed to it later on anyway, so it might be good just to put on videos of greater movies, greater artworks. So much beautiful documentaries and movies and things out there. So by all means, use technology. But see, again, my worry is not so much that. It's that I am constantly seeing children on the train, on the bus, sitting and having a wonderful ambient, omnidirectional attention, and the parent looking in horror. Oh my God, my kid's not doing something. Here's the iPhone. Get working on that video game. And I'm seeing this constantly now, in which the parent is offended or threatened by the kid just simply sitting there and doing what kids do and should be doing, looking out the window, daydreaming. I am seeing every day I go out now that this is becoming less and less and less. Yeah. Where the parent is literally forcing the gadget into, the gadget's not wrong, right? But why are you preventing this ambient thing happening by forcing the kid to play a video game or watch watch a video or whatever they're doing on the phone? This is catastrophe in the making.
Yeah, Michael, I just want to interject there, because you're bringing up a vision in my head. Before we got together, we were at dinner tonight, and we're talking about camping with our families. And I have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old daughter. And the most amazing thing for me to see is these unspoiled minds and letting them run loose in the forest. And it's just, they already know what to do. They already know how to interact. They have this knowledge. They just don't know how to express it yet. And it, just hearkening back to the biblical Tower of Babel, it almost seems like as soon as our society starts introducing ideologies and dogmas into these children's minds, it starts to warp them. It starts to mutate them into these weird creatures. And those creatures are called adults. And then we spend our whole adult life trying to transform ourselves back to what we already know. And as part of my philosophy is I always say we're trying to rediscover what we already know. And I think that's it's a critical point to do. And you talk about that a lot too. It's discovering who you are about yourself. And I just see it in a child's eyes, and it pains me to know that I have to be a parent in all of this and be a parent to my children in this society, knowing what I know, and I almost feel guilty in raising them. It's a hard concept that I'm battling with right now. I just wanted, if you have any comments on that, you don't have to.
Oh, I mean, it's really troublesome. But we have lost our own innocence. But you're talking about their natural intelligence, and of course, if people watch the last part of post-humanism, you'll see that I'm a big believer in that. I rest almost the future of the destruction of evil on that natural intelligence that children have. The natural intelligence that children possess is probably our only hope. The rest is just satellite. Other things we do are important, but it is really going to rest on the, the usage, the correct usage. And again, that can often mean getting out of the way. See, it's more of a yin zen thing. The parent getting out of the way to let this thing grow before, because remember that term I used, adultism? People should look this up on Wikipedia. Governmentality, total institution, and adultism. Those are the terms I remember using. And you will find that this is at play across the board. And once you become very savvy about how parents relate to their children as slaves, you'll start to notice it, and that'll help you. Do not do it, obviously, but because you'll see it constantly. It's very subtle in many ways. I was just watching a crime show about a psychotic mother, shot her husband, and the usual story. But the kids were in the house when she did it, and therefore later on, the prosecutors wanted to use the children to come on the dock. Very, very tense and anxious. Not a thing they really want to do, but they realize they're being forced. Their hand is being forced to do it. To bring these literally 5- and 6-year-old kids onto the dock to prosecute their mother, to give evidence against the mother. Now the grandparents stepped in and did something, made a plea bargain where the kids would not have to do this. Now on one level you're thinking, oh my God, the pension's off, the kids didn't have to go up there and go through this ordeal of testifying against their mother. But as a matter of fact, what you actually saw there, the intervention of those grandparents, was a form of adultism. Clueless people who have no clue what day of the week it is are now going to tell the children, deprive them of a most monumentally important rite of passage in those kids' lives. Because yes, there's pain involved in doing that, and it's a tense situation. But on the other side, the sense of responsibility, of exposing evil, even if that evil was in the mother, who shot their fucking father. Doesn't his memory, what are those children going to be when they grow up and say, our grandparents protected us, mollycoddled us, turned our brains into puree, when we actually needed that experience to get up and say, here is evil, here is good. You see, so even though on paper, it looks like we're protecting, actually what you did is you robbed these two children of a monumentally important statement. And you know the reason you did it? Because of adultism. You're just kids. We don't really want to hear what you have to say. Even though you were there and we weren't. You ain't getting up on a dock, in a public dock, to tell the truth. You see, so there's an example. I could go ad infinitum on this, but there's a little tiny example about how the truth and the real, right, got replaced by this pseudo-acculturated, we know what's best for the kids. Now, I'm sitting there thinking those kids have just lost the most important time, because there's something deeper about the human, For them, if they had got up and testified, as painful as it would have been, they would have been testifying, they would have been able to snap in, not to a domestic understanding of life only, which is what the grandparents were possessed in keeping them in, those two kids would have understood there's a human to human, right, relationship that's up and above the merely domestic. There's a thing called truth and honor and responsibility and rightness that is overarching my familial connections to mum and dad and grandparents and everybody else, right? Because that's what a court represents. That's what that action would have represented for them. So these grandparents prevented these two kids from being human. It kept them within the fold of the domestic circle. And I believe that that's an act of adultism. And that's just one example. There are millions of other examples in which the inherent natural intelligence of children is habitually and repeatedly silenced. Now, here's another, if I can just add one more of the most vital things. I think it's one of the most important things of tonight. I'll mention it briefly, but it's very important. And that is the role of the human body in this process of indoctrination. Adultism, totalitarianism, tyranny, oppression of any kind, social, historical, right? Domestic or work, but particularly in the domestic sphere, right, in the growth of a child. One of the steps we need to take right now in the age of revealing is to start factoring in the role of the human body in traumata. In other words, and this is coming from the great psychologist Alice Miller, who is the expert on this, the body doesn't lie. It's the only part of us that doesn't. The brain, the reason, right, the emotions constantly evade reality and compensate, like the body we compensate. But the body does not lie. If the body has been traumatized emotionally or physically, it remembers it and it doesn't forgive. Now, in our society, because of the role of Christianity and other false religions, we have got the most egregious falsities about forgiveness in general, but I don't really want to go down that road right now. All I can say for now is that the body does not forgive. And the body has its own language, and the body has its own processing of what happened to it. And that process is very different than the rational, right, mental way that we forgive and understand tyrants, be they parents, school teachers, priests, neighbors, extended family members, brothers, sisters, any form of tyranny that we are exposed to, the body remembers it all. And I'm talking in a Reichian way here, and the way Alexander Lowen, but specifically the way Alice Miller has delineated it. It's of monumental importance to our creativity, to our future relationships with other people, to our jobs, to our career. All these people sitting here going, Michael, I don't know what my vocation is. Well, you ain't going to find it. Just moving from the sensational, right, to the occupational, that's easy. Trying to make that jump out of those realms into our vocation, which is the Dharma, the reason we're in this existence, is one of the hardest things to find. As a matter of fact, you actually don't find it, it finds you. But a thing that you can do, one of the greatest bridges to finding out what your authentic reason is on this planet, we've had questions about this coming through, is now to understand that you are, let's develop a different relationship with our body, particularly in relationship to past trauma. This is monumental because there's a message that our bodies is trying to teach us. There's a very vital message that our bodies is trying to give us. And one could speak endlessly on this subject, right? But I'll leave it to you guys to go and get the Alice Miller books and get into this and try to teach it to your friends because it's very, very vital. That it's not just stepping out of the head. I'm not talking about that. You need the reason and you need all of that other voices. You need to observe it. But you need not also step into what the body has to say about the traumas that it has experienced, the traumas that it still contains inherently within it, and how that reality and you entering into a new relationship and dialogue with your body transforms everything in your life, from your, as I say, finding your authentic existence to daily relationships with other people and what have you. It's fundamental. Some of the biggest reasons why the change is not taking place over the many, many years with all these other modalities is because look at religion, look at Buddhism, look at all this nonsense. It denies the body, my friends. It denies the language of the body very, very much so, more deeper than you can understand. All that yoga and all that rubbish. It's actually continuing to suppress the language of the body. And all the medications we're taking and the drugs, all of it. The kind of cubicles we live in, the attack upon the human body just as a physical entity is another form of adultism, another form of tyranny that's going on. So we have to work with it, work with our yogas, our own type of yogas, our own kind of dance, our own kind of qigong, our own kind of tai chi. We've got to find something that now opens up dialogue, gives permission for the body to speak. And some people go, well, I've never been traumatized. Well, yeah, think again. But I'm talking more to the people who have actually suffered physical or mental abuse. It's a key thing for them to start acknowledging what the body thinks about that, right? What the body has to say about it. And the body will. The body will finally start to, make itself apparent in its own unique way. You have to be prepared for that as well. It may not do it in a way that's commonly known or understood, or that two people share the same way. When the body starts talking, it does it in a very peculiar way. So one has to be very flexible to listen to its dialogue, right? But this is just one piece I wanted to add, because you can't step out of the situations that we're in without this new sort of approach to stepping into the language of the body, psychologically speaking. It's vitally important. And you should find whatever modality, that you can do to grasp it for yourself, because this was very deeply embedded in ancient peoples. Right? That's why the ancients worked with kinds of dance, or they worked with kinds of rituals of the body. We don't understand it today. The walkabout, the Aboriginals and their walkabout, what do you think that was? And the sun dances and a lot of other things. Some ancient tribes have a very negative attitude towards the body, but some of the highest cultures had a very unique, brilliant understanding of what body is and body movement. And you can do this in any way that you choose to do it. But it's very, very important. When you choose a martial arts system, or you choose, again, invent your own. You've got to start listening to this incredible intelligence, especially in Western countries. It's so marginalized and so suppressed. And I think the whole new concept of physicality, as laid down by Wilhelm Reich, Alexander Lowen, Alice Miller particularly, needs to. By the way, Alice Miller admits that she was supported by Wilhelm Reich. He kind of nudged her on with her theory. He's one of the only people who ever did. So again, one needs to really absorb what these teachers have to say.
Well, thank you for that, Michael. That actually kind of dovetails into my question. A while back, I heard you discuss a concept, or you said it, and it really struck me when you said it, and that was that the whole concept of evil itself has within it the seeds of its own destruction. And I wondered if you could maybe talk about that a little bit, and perhaps that will get into a lot of the solutions that you've been bringing forward. I mean, we've been talking about solutions the whole time, but maybe you want to get more specific on some other concepts of this, and how we can not only take that down within us, which is what you were just speaking of, but about also in the world, and how maybe that's what we're witnessing around us. And if you could just talk about that concept a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, well, that's one of the solutions that ties in with the discernment and the children. But it's a law. We talked about nature earlier on. What's unique about nature, and that is evil is something that man has brought, whether through the genetic interference or whatever. Nature hasn't got any evil in it. The universe is in perfect harmony, and in fact, I think we still only have a fleeting understanding of that harmony. We even still need to learn more about the harmony of life, of water, of the whole thing. But man is the being who brings this aberration, these aberrant ideas to the world, right? Evil is basically a phenomenon of aberrant thinking. So, strangely, when you start asking the questions that we've been asking about, how do you then solve this problem of evil? When you start asking this question, there is an incredible revelation that finally comes to you, which is that, as we spoke about earlier, you don't really fight it head on. That's not going to work. But then later on, as you really start studying it, and the origin of evil, the whole concept of evil has been central to all my work, is that you suddenly discover that everything that is evil or unjust has within it the seeds of its own destruction, carries within it its own weakness. And therefore, of course, you need the discernment to be able to see what it is. That's the clarity we talked about earlier, that the whole of life is to gain the clarity. And you won't get that clarity if you're too abstract, if you're too much into metaphysical stuff. You're not going to get it. Learn from nature. How do you learn the discernment? You learn, nature will teach you it. But if you're not in harmony with nature, then you can't possibly learn it. If you're in harmony with the human world, that's not going to help. That's the source of the problem. So you have to go to the great teacher that's in perfect harmony for you to even learn the rudiments of what harmonious vision, harmonious thinking is. Right. But say you've done a bit of this. Say you've twigged this idea that everything that is unjust, every liar, every cheat, knows that they're lying and cheat. So you have to be so up to speed with what evil is. That's why in order to understand what good is, goodness, what truth is, you've got to study its opposite until you can't take it anymore. So the journey of man is to discover all what is aberrant. We talked about this in a slightly different context earlier about plunging into the darkness. You're going to have to do that to find the gems of the higher metaphysical truths. They're not going to come to you easily. They're not for sale at the market. And the same thing is also about in context with evil. You have to discover the whole anatomy of evil, of pathology, of psychology. You know, again, I've been dealing with this in the psychic vampirism. We go very deeply, I think, very, very deeply into this. And I intend to continue with that process. But one has to keep on delving into the question of what this evil is, where it comes from, the pathologies, try to trace it back historically, as we've done to these genetic interference and earthly traumas, but even in more recent times, the mind controls, the adultism. See, we're looking at this thing from multiple sources, and we're doing it in a very flexible way. We're able to throw out a lot of stuff we thought before and bring in some new, always shining new light on it. So continue to study what is aberrant, what is deformed. And you'll learn, see, in the disease will teach you what the remedy is. You first have to have the illness, the sickness, right? In ancient medicine, that was to do what? To solve diseases. The doctor comes up with a cure for something, it's because he first had the disease to cure it and ask the question, how does this cause? Right? All of the greatest malicious diseases of the world caused somebody to ask, what the hell is this? How does it get caused? And then you go deeper and you find out the reason, right? So it's the same thing with evil. You must study it. You can't run away from it. And when you start studying this pathology, it isn't just an objective thing because it's in you as well. So it's enormously impactful on your own life. As you discover these reasons, then a lot of light is shone on your own existence, your own life. But one of the forms of evil that I have gone into great detail to try and extrapolate is this whole concept of self-sadism. Because the moment that you start talking about evil, very quickly somebody starts thinking in these cartoon terms, always about government, evil, politicians, priests, all the external forms, murderers, serial killers. You're thinking in terms of, immediately you do this, and this is already a mistake. The human race has to wake up to realize that the greatest evil is done from ourselves to ourselves. When the guy earlier on was asking about, hey Michael, tell us about the true self. I'll tell you about the true self. It is the most damaged, violated, and do you know who's doing the violating? We are. No, okay, of course, because of conditioning, because of course of parental upbringing and what have you, and this terribly psychotic so-called civilization that isn't a civilization at all. How can it be a civilization? You killed off all the priests, you killed off all the druids. How the hell can you have anything true from that? You know what you get? The mess we've got right now. So the thing is that, but when we start to discover how violent we are to ourselves, technically speaking, masochism, self-sadism, then we have revolution. Then we have absolute. So when you talk about the seeds of destruction, evil is with its own destruction. It starts at home. Because once you really grasp how the pathology comes apart, the ingredients of it, and I've worked for years to try and publish works to show how this is. And that sometimes makes me different than a lot of other, colleagues and fellows in the alternative history movement. I've almost, risked total marginalization in my own life because of going into the philosophy, going into the psychology. Why, you should be just talking about bug-eyed aliens and the FDA. And Roswell. Why? People are doing that really, really well. I'm more fascinated by this. But, it's cost me incredible losses and sorrows and all sorts of other marginalization and attacks. Not that I give a shit. I'm going to carry on doing what I'm doing. But, there's prices to pay for all of this. But in the end, my work is very mature. And I think that as people mature in their understandings, they're going to have to face it. They're going to have to face it. The enemy is, the enemy is, but that enemy is an enemy because they themselves are the most self-sadistic people. See, there's a common denominator in all evil. The ones we talk about as being the tyrants are the most self-murdered people of all. Right? Alfred Adler. You have to have a superiority complex over the inferiority complex. We use these terms without even thinking what they mean. These people need the cars and the position and the desks and the banks and the money and the corporations and the big cigars because they're fucking nobodies. They're little men. That's why they're perverse. That's why they go and rape children. That's why they do what they do. That's why they need all this status and diplomatic immunities and what have you, and police forces and armies to protect them because they're pathetic. And the moment that we know that, then we know what these little worm tongues are, right? And we realize also how few they are and how they can be dealt with. We send them a message that one day we're going to deal with you, your courts and your federal orgs. Keep on doing it, keep on going, because one day we're going to deal with you. Because evil has these seeds of this destruction within it, and good always triumphs over evil. Always and forever.
Hey, just to go on that, I have a question from Kay. We're going to do a couple more questions, and then if you want to have a few words before we depart, Michael, that'd be great. This is from Kay from Facebook. Kind of going on what you were just touching upon. What are some of the unforeseen dangers one might encounter on their path countering the Illuminati? As a seeker, what should be avoided?
Well, this is a kind of a good question because obviously there's many ways of combating these people. I only specialize in more of the interpersonal stuff, although I've got innumerable other physical, political, theories. They're not very democratic, and that's why I can't really openly talk about them, because I don't think the human race is even close to getting there yet. But I would say that, you see, one of the most amazing things that occurs is at the moment that you go down this sort of road to fight that external evil, you're going to have to deal with amazing alienation from your so-called friends and pals in society. So I think that one of the most extreme obstacles is alienation. That the moment that you, and I'm sure you've all felt it, I'm sure that you have stood right there. And this can affect your marriages, your connection to your closest friends, to how you interact with schools, with your kids. I mean, this is going to end up affecting the decisions that you make. The moment that you put on the boxing gloves to go out there, you're going to find the first hurdle is that the people that you are frequenting on a daily basis, you see, think you're mad. Or that they say, you can't be greater than me. I don't want to hear this because you're trying to act smarter. Well, you are smarter. I kind of use that word morally superior. Yeah, you are actually fucking superior, right? But see, unfortunately, that doesn't go down well because the flip side of it is that people don't want to be inferior, and 20, 30, 40-year-old people do not want to be told by you that everything they know is wrong. So one of the biggest problems is alienation. Now, some people can handle it. Other people find it impossible to deal with because it just makes them feel too alone and or too paranoid or what have you. And everybody has this thing that happens in the beginning when they start learning this knowledge. They want to go out there and tell everybody, and then that just puts everybody off, and then they're freaked out and they're left alienated. It happens a lot. So that's one of the biggest ones. After that, I think it's just a matter of simply being good at the job. Right? Think of fighting the Illuminati, fighting evil as just a job. For me, it's just a job, right? So I try to perfect the job. Try to write better, try to have my websites looking better, try to explain what I mean better, try to learn a bit more about public presentation. If I was thinking of doing a video, save up some money, make it look better. So it's just very slow, gradual processes about trying to make your product better, try to get your word out, to make it more rational and sane, fix errors or problems, through the years, and just keep perfecting your art. So I would look at it that way. And remember, also, I think one of the things that counterbalances the fear and the paranoia is that this is just very fascinating as a subject. It's a very occult subject. It's very unusual. It's very synthetic. And when you're studying this subject, you're studying almost every other. I mean, look at this discussion. We've covered health, healing, science, psychology, philosophy, in just a few hours. So, and art and all those sorts of things, metaphysics, mythology. Look at what we visited. Just in a simple conversation like this. So it's going to do great for your synapses. You are becoming a better being. So don't have as an object of your life this work as fighting some demon. That's not going to work. That'll last for about 5 minutes, and then you're going to be bored to tears. That motive is just, I don't think it's strong. Try to have that motive in the back of your mind, because you're doing a great thing by fighting evil. But you see, like I said, if you're not doing the holy work yourself, then it's like rubbing the window with an oily rag and saying you can't see the garden. You haven't dealt with pulling out the aberrant thinking in your own consciousness. How the hell? So in other words, if the evil has completely worked on your subconscious, and I see this a lot in the Christian movement. Some of the work that they're doing I really think is great. They have some very great teachers against the Illuminati. But you see, they don't realize that the platform which they're standing was created by the Illuminati. The College of Cardinals, the Archons, the Luciferians have created the very Christianity on which they're standing. So this is one example of what I mean. So they're fighting evil with great intention, not realizing that they're actually handicapped by the fact that their own ideologies are largely created by the very people they're fighting. And that can be easily proven, by the way. And they don't like it when it is proven. So there's all sorts of aberrations like this. So I don't think that you should make the goal any kind of, fighting somebody, something. Better just think of it as something that you're doing that is changing your life. Absolutely on all levels. Physical, mental, emotional, and it's doing good for you. When you think in those terms, you'll be able to continue against all the obstacles that are there. That's not doubt there are many obstacles. You said one, alienation. But you'll be able to get through it all if you're very conscious of the changes, the good changes, the positive changes that are happening to your own being. This is important. Not how, on the chart, how many people we've taken down. This is infantile. This is like, war games crap. It's not going to work. You're not going to feel it's going to get you down too much. It doesn't work on that level. It's got to do with the fact of your own mastery. Like a samurai, he tests himself. He's at war with himself first. He is involved in perfecting himself. All mystics are involved in that. Plus, you're also building up the immunity so that the other side can't attack you. I mean, you can't walk out there and fight them without a lot of psychic immunity and a lot of the blue flame of anger. Well, the blue flame of anger is very different than the red flame of anger. Red flame of anger everybody has. That's Alex Jones. He's doing great. There's a need for that. But it's not going to work. It's not going to ultimately work. And we know that because his platform is that usual Christian platform that I find to be very unsustainable. So there needs to be a shift. And maybe he'll make it, maybe he won't. And people like him, maybe they'll make it, maybe they won't. But there's going to have to be a much greater upgrading of consciousness in order to be able to deal with that enemy, because that enemy knows you through and through. It is so fucking smart. So you're going to have a kind of an immunity to it. I mean, studying its ways. Is it studying you? Like a hunter studies, the tiger in the long grass. You discern what's it doing. It's a cunning thing. It doesn't quite let you in. It's a chameleon. It changes. It changes as you change. So it's a lifelong, unique study. It's not science. It's not meta-science. It's not religion. What we're doing here is something very new. Our forefathers didn't even have the hardwiring to do it, except extremely unique individuals. What we're doing, we're inventing as we're doing it. Right? We're in a very few years. This way of looking at society, looking at psychosocial matters in a conspiratorial framework is a very new thing. We can even name the people who invented it, for Christ's sake. So it's a very new concept. And we're learning as we go. We're not perfect. I've always said I'm not an expert in anything. I'm not perfect. I'm sort of being guided. I'm going where I'm guided, right? And I'm not averse to changing what I saw before or modifying what I saw before. Because I don't have a university degree. I haven't jumped through some hoops where I need to be so adamantine and rigid. That's bullshit. That's for the man in the white coats. In this kind of subject, you need to be flexible, completely flexible, otherwise, and spontaneous. Otherwise, you're never going to grasp it. You're going to be too partisan. You're going to be too nailed to one theory, beating it to death forever. My work is completely eclectic. It changes, morphs. Some people don't like that. People criticize it. They want to find niggly little flaws and points, stupid little thing where they're missing the bigger picture. Well, that's fine. Let them do that. They're the losers. They're the losers.
Michael, that's amazing, and we've covered so many great points here tonight, and I just wanted to know, was there anything that maybe we didn't quite get to that you specifically wanted to address, or that you maybe noticed in some of the questions that you've been receiving, whether it's online or whatnot, and if you had any sort of closing comments that you also wanted to add to that? Well,
again, I reiterate that we didn't touch on female Illuminati because that's still in a process. And when it's out, we'll have millions of questions. I didn't talk too much on psychic vampirism because in a couple of days, the audio for that 6-hour audio is going to be available, so people can dip into that. There is one question pertaining to psychic vampirism that Jeremy asked on the Facebook page, and it was more about if you can determine, or a psychic vampiristic kind of person, right, an energy drainer, whatever you want to call them, will they have a peculiarity of diet? You have to question about whether some of their, are they peculiar in their diet or other habits, daily habits? You know, and the answer is no. This quality of being a vampiristic kind of person is something that is an energy thing. It is, in other words, somebody who's got a really terrible diet, that's not going to bring on that trait. So, in other words, I don't see, 300-pound vampires walking around. In fact, from what I've learned from people, vampiristic people are extremely gracious, and often very sophisticated in their looks. They're kind of like, the obsessional, compulsive people who are very, very, very conscious of their appearance. It's part of the whole dynamic. It's a big package that they have. So, although I would say that, of course, the traits of vampirism can be found in, some couch potato type of person, absolutely. In fact, we all have those traits. But in the extreme versions that I've been dealing with, I would say that on the whole, these are people who come across actually quite friendly, and without any apparent surface aberration, right? It's very important to know. So the answer to Jeremy's question is no, you're not going to be able to discern them that way. And also, they don't become who they are because of diet or other, things. They become who they are, as you'll hear in the audio that I'm doing, mostly because of parental mistreatment, and also because of future interactivity, with people, the societies that they're born in. These are two huge factors. There's other factors as well, of course. But the two main ones is parental abuse and also just exposure to the world, which is pretty much, if you really face it, pretty psychotic, actually. So it's something that is not going to be discernible simply, right? And remember, a vampiristic person may act vampiristically on you, but not on another person. We're all sensitized in different ways. So you might find the presence of somebody very draining, whereas another person doesn't find them draining at all. Remember we said earlier on that one of them, when damage is done to somebody, the worst damage that evil can do is always on a good person. This is the same thing with vampirism. It's only good, moral, true people that suffer more under vampiristic people. It's just a strange way of it. Somehow evil people get off the hook. In other words, a vampiristic person will only be attracted to somebody who's got something they want. And those things that they want are energy, goodness, wealth, right? All of the rest, all the positive things that they think they don't have inside themselves that they want from somebody else. And remember, there's different levels of vampirism. The majority of the people who are vampiristic probably don't even know that they are vampiristic. Just in the same way that a needy lover is probably very unaware that they're needy. You could point it out to them a million times. They think they're being romantic. They think it's a perpetual fucking Valentine's Day. Right? What are you going to do with that? You can't make them see it no matter what. They think they're being attentive. I'm just being attentive. You know what I mean? So we're dealing with people who are vampiristic, may not even realize that they are. And how the hell are you going to point it out? Do you even have the language to point it out? That's why I produced this, this DVD on it, because we need to have the awareness of how to judge one, uncover them quickly so that we don't suffer. And I believe we shouldn't actually engage with them at all, actually. But shouldn't we even engage with a lesser kind of person who might change their ways? How would you even go about addressing to them that their energies are vampiristic? You're not really going to learn it on some spinner rack. It's quite more difficult than that. Those are helpful, but we're dealing with pathological types here. You have to have a lot of knowledge. Because remember, as I said, you're going to have to know the etiology. How did they become like that? Was it from the mother, the father, some other terrible, trauma that they suffered as teenagers or youth? You have to know how to negotiate that. Sit them down and talk with them about it. So there's lots of different levels here. But that is one last question I wanted to look at there about, how, on the surface level, it's not so much about just common habits that you could tell a vampiristic person, certainly not by their diet or any of those things at all.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. I just wanted to thank you for participating tonight and answering these questions. It was truly amazing. Dave's correct. We covered so many different topics. Pretty much everything everybody's going through nowadays, they have to look at it from a multidisciplinary point of view, and they have to take things from many different angles and in many different shades of light in order to make some sense of what's going on. So I'd just like to thank you. I'd like to thank Dave and his beautiful wife for hosting the event here at their dojo tonight. I just wanted to thank Michelle as well for tending to the Facebook questions, and I'd like to thank everybody that's participated on Conspiratorium on Facebook for the questions. It's guided the first event and the second event, and we hope to do a third event in the near future. And it's only with the help of those Facebook questions and the interaction with those people in the community that's growing there that this evening's possible. So I just wanted to say thanks to everybody.
And Michael, I'd like to say thank you too as well, and on a personal note, your work has definitely changed and influenced my path and really helped to clear up a lot of convolution that I had in my own thought process. And so, thank you for doing what you do. And it's interesting, we're just finishing off with psychic vampirism and how there's these toxic people that can be contagious with their toxicity and they can pass it on to you. Well, I think that works in the reverse order as well. And I think that there are people who are more connected to their inner true self and to that light element of themselves that we all have, and they become contagious in a positive way. And I just wanted to say that for you personally, for me, that's been how you've affected me. So again, thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks to both of you for putting this on. I must say that the questions are superb. I mean, really, really top notch. I'm so thrilled about that. And long may it continue. People can just swamp the Facebook with their questions. We'll be reading them all, getting more, as you say, better at this ourselves. It's early days yet, but I'm thrilled with the way it's been going. And the chance I get to do this more eclectic thing where, we are able to deconstruct some of the models that have been used. I really wanted to do that in these conspiratoriums because I do believe that the audience is so up to speed now. It shouldn't no longer be talked down to, and it was very important for me to break the formula of just standing in front of a podium or a lectern, and having a silent audience there. So these questions, it's really good that they're of a high level, that they're covering conspiracy, but they're also covering spiritualism, spiritual quest. I don't want it to be one way or the other, just only conspiracy or only personal sort of spiritual. It's great that it's a big mix. And I'm very good at that. I love that style, So yeah, let's get together again the next time. And again, big thanks from me to all of you guys, Michelle included, everyone, and the people who turned up today. Big thanks for doing that. I know it's freezing out there and cold and dark weather as it is over here. So, a very, very strong thank you for all of you guys putting in the effort.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. We'll see you next time.